Ms. Apodaca, are we ready in the back?
We sure are.
Ms. Tejas, you ready to go?
Yes.
All right. Chairman Rosatos, any preliminary thoughts or issues? I have an alarm set for 3:40 p.m., 5 minutes
Awesome.
before our hard break.
I appreciate that. I don't have anything else. Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer.
All right, you guys listen. When the duck quacks, it will be time to go. All right. So, Mr. Rankin, I'm assuming you're presenting this witness,
I am, Mr. Hearing Officer.
and is Goodnight ready to proceed with its case?
We are more than ready to proceed with our case, Mr. Hearing Officer.
Is it Mr. or Dr. Macbeth?
It's Mr. Macbeth.
All right, sir, if you please raise your right hand. You swear and affirm the testimony you give here today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
Yes, I do.
All right, Mr. Rankin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hearing Officer. Mr. Macbeth, will you just state your full name for the record?
My full name is John Campbell Macbeth.
And by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by Austin Consulting Petroleum Engineers, Inc.
And in what capacity?
Well, I'm a consulting petroleum engineer. I'm a partner, founding partner in the firm, and I'm also vice president in our business structure.
And have you previously had the opportunity to testify before the Oil Conservation Division or the Commission here in New Mexico?
Not before this case, no.
You previously testified before the Texas Railroad Commission?
I have many times.
And is your educational experience and experience throughout your career as a petroleum engineer and a reservoir engineer listed as an exhibit to the direct testimony that you filed in this matter?
Yes, my resume is attached.
Will you just give us a brief summary of your education and your work experience, in particular as it relates to petroleum engineering and reservoir engineering and enhanced oil recovery work?
Sure. So I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 1987. I went immediately to work for Schlumberger International overseas. I was in Egypt, Kuwait, Pakistan, Oman for about 5 years, running logs, working with clients there. And then I came home and started various consulting positions from that point in time. In 96, I ended up at Platt Sparks and Associates, which is a group of folks that most of them are still with Austin Consulting Petroleum Engineers. But I started there in 96. We were acquired by a bigger consulting firm in 2014 for a 6-year term. In 2020, Austin Consulting Petroleum Engineers was formed.
And you've done work, as you stated, across not just enhanced oil recovery, but you've done some work on saltwater disposal wells too. Is that correct?
That's for sure. So I'll kind of speak generally about my practice and then more specifically about EOR. So we provide petroleum engineering services to a wide range of clients, from individuals all the way up to majors and everything in between. We do regulatory work. We do straight up reservoir engineering studies. We do economic analyses, and we do some amount of litigation as well. And as far as specific CO2 and enhanced oil recovery experience, when I first landed at Platt Sparks in 1996, they had been engaged for a large study that involved CO2 volumes that moved from Bravo Dome down into the Permian Basin. And we basically tracked every MCF of CO2 that was delivered that started at Bravo Dome to look at the efficiency of the floods. There was an allegation in a legal dispute that the value of the CO2 was related to the amount of oil that was recovered. And so we had to go see how that really worked out when you figured out how much CO2 went to each flood and how much oil came out. So I got exposed to almost every flood in the Permian Basin doing that work. The same dispute migrated to McElmo Dome, which has bigger volumes in southwest Colorado coming down the Cortez pipeline. So a similar study was done for that. I've also done some tax work in the Wasson field for Shell. We tracked pattern by pattern their recoveries to show that the CO2 that was injected actually recovered oil for tax purposes for the years 1990 and 91. We're doing that work, I think, in 2000 because it was part of an audit. In addition to that, I've been involved in regulatory matters that where you're going into a field and asking for a change in field rules. I've done that fairly recently at the Wasson field to change the spacing to compete with some of these off unit horizontal wells that are being drilled to the west in the Platang field because they were snugging right up against the unit. And for fairness, OCC wanted to have wells right up against the unit line also. And then in the past, I've done worked on other fields at the Railroad Commission, the Yates field for field rules. And so that's a pretty good overview.
And based on that, your education experience that you just gave us a summary of, do you hold yourself out as an expert in reservoir and petroleum engineering?
I do.
Mr. Hearing Officer, at this time, I would tender Mr. Macbeth as an expert witness in reservoir and petroleum engineering.
Any objection from Empire?
Without objection.
OCD,
No objection.
Rice,
No.
Pilot?
No objection.
You'll be so recognized.
Mr. Macbeth, were you engaged by Goodnight Midstream to form and provide opinions in this matter?
I'd say it a little differently. I was engaged to review data, to analyze information, and then to see if my expertise was related to any of that data. And then the opinions kind of fall out of that study. So that's how I'd say it.
Okay. Yeah, so you weren't given any specific instructions about what your opinions would be or what the.
No.
Now, what data and information did you consider informing your opinions ultimately?
So I've looked at, there's been a lot of data exchange between the parties in this matter. So information from Empire, information from Goodnight. I've also acquired on my own public information from the NMOCD website, well files, logs. I've gone and looked at specific hearings that have occurred in the past, downloaded all the transcripts and the exhibits that go with that. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Now, have you also considered and reviewed Empire's filed written direct and rebuttal testimony from its own experts and witnesses that were filed in this case?
Did you say Empires?
Yeah.
Yes, I have. I've looked at them all. I've focused on particular witnesses that are covering same ground that I am.
Got it. And have you also considered Goodnight's experts' written testimony as well?
Yes, I have.
And do the opinions that you're expressing today take into account your current understanding of the information and the opinions expressed in the testimony of the witnesses for both Goodnight and Empire?
It does. And the way you've asked that, I want to just clarify that as I've sat in the back of this room for a couple of weeks, I've learned a few more things. So it is, yeah, definitely my current understanding.
Okay. And have you yourself prepared written rebuttal, direct, and supplemental testimony in exhibits that are marked as Exhibit F and Exhibits F1 through F20, rebuttal Exhibit F and Exhibits F27 through F27, and then supplemental Exhibit F and Exhibits F28 through 30?
I'm going to assume you got those numbers right because I don't have them memorized. But
Yeah.
yes, I had three separate testimonies.
I think I misstated for your rebuttal exhibit. It's a rebuttal Exhibit F and Exhibits F21 through F27.
Okay. Yes, that's right.
Were the exhibits prepared by you or compiled under your direction and supervision?
Yes, the exhibits and the written testimony as well.
Any corrections or changes to the testimony or exhibits that were filed?
I found a couple of small typos in the last couple of days looking over the original statement. On page 11, there's a reference to some perfs in the 746 well. Near the bottom of the page, it says perforated from 4100 to 4100, which is a small interval. It should be 4100 to 41, should be 4100 to 4110. Then on page 13 and 15, I inadvertently referred to Dr. Davidson as Mr. Davidson.
Got it.
Apologies for that.
No other changes or corrections to your testimony that you identified?
No.
Okay. Do you adopt the testimony with those changes and modifications you just reviewed? Do you adopt the testimony in your self-affirmed statement, your rebuttal statement, and the supplemental statement that are marked as Exhibit F as your own sworn testimony today?
Yes, I do.
At this time, Mr. Hearing Officer, I move the admission into the record of Mr. Macbeth's self-affirmed statements, his direct rebuttal, and his supplemental testimony in Exhibit F and F1 through F30.
Any objection from Empire?
Without objection.
OCD,
No objection.
Rice,
No objection.
Pilot,
No objection.
they'll be admitted.
Mr. Macbeth, I think you alluded to this just a moment ago, but you've been present for the summary testimony, the cross-examination, and the redirect testimony provided by Empire's witnesses during the first week of testimony in February and during much of this week's testimony. Is that correct?
Almost all of it. There was one day where I was sent back to your office to review some new information that Dr. Buckwalter had provided. So I think Dr. Trentham and Mr. Meltzer were testifying. I reviewed that from the archives when I got home.
Okay.
And then this week I was here all week except for I was driving and listening to the testimony up until 3:00 when I arrived here on Monday.
And did you also now prepare summary slides reflecting any of your opinions as they exist today?
Yes, I have.
And do those slides reflect your up-to-date opinions, including any additional opinions formed based on your observations of the summary testimony, the cross-examination, and the redirect testimony from Empire's witnesses?
They do. I don't cover every single thing I had in my testimonies because some issues have, I think, fallen by the wayside, but I'd say they cover the important things.
Mr. Macbeth, I'm going to go ahead and share your slides, and we'll go ahead and walk through your summary. Your first slide here is a summary of your opinions. Will you just walk us through each of your sort of summary overview of your opinions?
Sure. And this is just to tell you what's coming. We'll have details on each of these and some additional things. So the first opinion is that I've reviewed Empire's log analysis, and they show very, very high oil saturations and low mobile water saturations in intervals that were tested and produced essentially zero water. I'm going to show you one example, but I've looked at several wells that show the same thing. The second category that we're going to go through is the allegation that the Grayburg and the San Andreas were connected as of 1986. I'm going to talk about the data that allegation is based on and show you some information about the RFT as well. The third one on this list has to do with the economics that were put forward by Empire through Mr. West's spreadsheet calculation. And I want to talk about the inputs to that, how I studied it and figured out what they were doing, and then my corrections to some of the obvious problems with those inputs and what it does to the economics. And then finally, I go over some observations about Dr. Buckwalter's reservoir model and how it differs from known information that we have and how that, in my opinion, would really impact its reliability.
So turning to your first substantive slide here, just review for us what this shows and how it relates to your opinion.
Sure. So this goes with the first opinion. This is an example of some of my review of new text log analysis. What I did is I tried to square up actual measured data with what they were assessing in the same zones. So I was provided with LAS files of their analysis, and I went in and I captured the average oil saturation for the zones. And then I looked at what had happened when the well was drilled and those zones were tested, either through swabbing or in a couple of cases when they set a pump and moved large volumes of water to see if those zones would test. And you can see that in the reason I've got two colors there, those two zones were kind of treated separately as two groups of perforations. And the takeaway from this is that in these zones where you had as high as 73% oil saturation, we were producing 100% water, and that just can't occur.
But how much water total was withdrawn as from these tests?
In this particular well, if you add up all the swabbing and the production that was done with a submersible pump, it's about 1,700 barrels of water, no oil.
Now, this was, Newtek prepared two separate analyses. Was this Newtek's revised analysis or its original analysis?
Now, this is the first one that I had that was available to put in my original statement. So that would have been as of August. I think they had done the work previous to that, but it would have been as of August 2024.
Why didn't you refer to or rely on Newtek's revised analysis?
Well, I was kind of poised to because they had issued a report that redid the analysis on a single well. And I got quizzed about this at my deposition because the report was confusing to say the least. It said, here's an alternative analysis, but it didn't say this replaces our first analysis. It doesn't say anything about what the first analysis was. Then the individual got deposed and I asked you to specifically ask them, okay, so we don't have to worry about the original analysis. And the answer was, no, we stand by the original analysis. And it's in fact the more robust one that we believe in. So I stuck with this.
How does this next slide relate to your analysis of Newtek's log analysis?
So we're on the same topic and I just wanted to show visually, they gave me kind of an unusual LAS file. It had oil saturation in it. It had bulk volume of immobile water. So I couldn't compare things. I had to go in and using the porosity, calculate bulk volume of each of the components. And you can see it's a little unusual. Normally from log analysis, you don't get immobile water, but that's an output from their analysis that I think was explained on earlier this week, that it comes from a relationship that they've developed from the log curves through a big database of nuclear resonance imaging measurements. So I used it. You can think of this as a pore, and you've got 62% oil over this zone. You've got only 17% mobile water and 21% immobile water. And yet when the well is tested and the zone is tested, produces 100% water. It literally makes no sense with what actually came out of the well.
Now, next set of slides, I think, goes into a new set of topics here where we spent a lot of time today talking about pressures. Just walk us through this initial slide and how it relates to your analysis about pressures in the formations.
Okay, and there's before, when I created these slides, there was still kind of a live controversy about whether the measurement was at above mean sea level 250 or below. I think that's been put to bed. Because I've heard Mr. West say that he's gone back to his original assessment, which I agree that it looks like the measurement would have been at below 250 below. So you're in the Grayberg. But I still want to point out that we don't know that much about the measurement. It's 1450. It was reported in a unitization hearing. We don't have the source document. We don't have a bottom hole pressure. We don't have a fluid level. So there's still some question marks around that pressure. And it's a real important pressure for Empire's case. Even though we tend to agree now, I guess, what datum that goes with. There are no measurements, no original measurements in the San Andres. So they're having to take a measurement in the Grayberg and assume that you can take it down into the San Andres disposal zone and assume that that's right. So I just wanted to point that out. This information is used principally by two of Empire's witnesses, Mr. West, who's just recently showed his opinions on that. But then from our previous session, Dr. Buckwalter uses that information in his model. And he had adjusted his model for the higher pressure that assumed that measurement was at minus 250 or above mean sea level. I'm sorry, 250 above mean sea level. So any run that you see from Dr. Buckwalter that starts at like 1700 or more PSI, they've been supplanted, but that's not relevant anymore.
Anything more on this slide,
No.
Mr. Macbeth? This slide, I think, based on Mr. West's revised testimony, we don't need to address, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
I thought we were going to have a big fight about it, but it looks like it's resolved.
Then continue with your discussion about pressure, how this next slide refers or relates to your pressure analysis.
Okay, so this, we know that Empire has started with that 1450 measurement. They've assumed they can take it down into the San Andreas for comparative purposes. And then they've gone and found an RFT measurement. Now, there was a little bit of testimony this morning about what an RFT tool is. When I worked for Schlumberger, I ran about 150 of them, and they are used usually the last run in a well because you use the previous runs to pick the points you're going to measure. You have hydraulic pistons where you can set that tool in the well bore, push it up against the side of the well bore, and then a probe comes out of the middle of that packer section, goes into the reservoir, and then opens a valve and measures the pressure there. There's quality control that goes along that. You're always watching for a packer leak. If you have a packer leak, that means you go back to hydrostatic pressure in the well bore. So those are the pressures he's used. And if we look at those pressures, they say something completely different than what Empire is alleging, that we've got connected zones with fractures up and down through the San Andreas and the Grayburg. And I want to show you what I mean by that on the next slide.
Before we move to the next slide, Mr. Macbeth, you mentioned that Empire was using this data to establish a communication or pressure communication with the San Andreas. And you were present for all the testimony throughout this case, and you heard all the disputes over tops and where the San Andreas is and where the San Andreas isn't. I wanted you to just, as you speak through and talk about these different locations and depths, if you would just articulate for us when you're talking about what Empire refers to as the San Andreas versus what may be Goodnight's disposal zone or what. So just to be clear, okay? And here we'll move on to the next slide, I think, because you're going to discuss it. What does this next slide show?
Let's just briefly go to this slide. This is Mr. West's slide. It's the one that I guess should have been up. We should go back to the original one where he's gone down to his different pressure. But in the middle, there's a highlighted in yellow, the MSU 211 RFT data. That's the data that he looked at. That's the data that I'm going to talk about on the next slide.
Okay. Nothing else here?
Nothing else. Okay, this is a simple plot I made of those RFT measurements. And it's a plot that I would have made if I was sitting in a logging truck doing logs in the Middle East. You're taking those measurements because you're looking for contacts. You start deep, you make a measurement, you plot it on your graph paper, you come up hole to the next pick from the geologist, and you set the tool again, you make a measurement, and you're looking for a gradient that is reflective of the water in the interval. You then keep coming up hole and you start to see a change in the gradient. And that's because you're moving into a transition zone. Eventually you get, with your stations moving up the hole, you move into an oil zone. That'll have a different slope. And if there's a gas cap in this reservoir, you get to a point where the slope of the line goes quite vertical and you found the gas oil contact. That's what you're trying to establish when looking at these RFTs. Now, if I look at the measurements between the stations in this RFT, you've got pressure differences of a couple of 100 pounds or more, only over 11 feet, or you've got 150 pounds over 21 feet. There is no liquid that exists on Earth that can explain, that has enough density to explain that kind of pressure difference from a hydrostatic standpoint. So what this is telling us is those stations are separated. They have intervening formations that allow large pressures to exist over short distances in the wellbore, and that means it's not connected. So I cannot square this data with a theory that says we've got fractures, vertical fractures up and down in the reservoir.
I'm curious, Mr. Macbeth, when one is running an RFT tool, where are they looking to test? I mean, what zones are they usually trying to find to test with an RFT?
you're usually setting the tool based on picks from a geologist, and the geologist will do it in the best porosity. Because every time you set the tool, it costs money, and you don't want to set it in a shale. You don't want to set it in a dense interval and where you'll get a bad reading. So you set it in the zones that would likely produce.
Anything further on this slide?
One other thing. So you might be wondering, why is it that we've got these big pressure differences? And it's got to be from depletion. The intervals in the Grayberg have been produced since the 30s, and you have well bores that penetrate them and produce laterally, but they don't connect vertically. That's the point from it.
Got it. Next slide. What do you have? What does this data show?
Well, this is to show that I'm not basing this analysis on a single well. We were provided a spreadsheet from Empire that summarized a number of RFTs that were taken, most of them about the same time as this. These were 86, thereabouts. So we've got similar kind of slopes that don't fall on a normal hydrostatic line, big differences in measurements over short distances in the wellbore.
Anything further on this discussion?
No.
Now, this next set of slides is a new topic here, addressing economics. You reviewed Empire's economic analyses.
Well, I did. I reviewed spreadsheets that I received. And I had to do kind of a forensic dive into those spreadsheets. The testimony that went along with those spreadsheets did not describe in much detail at all what was occurring there. So we went into the spreadsheets, understood how they worked, came up with a list of questions for you to use at a deposition, and got some further information. So I understand them now, but they weren't well explained in the testimony.
And in the testimony, did it explain, did it provide a hydrocarbon recovery factor, or what was missing from the testimony that you needed to look for?
I never saw any discussion about a recovery factor. There's an implicit recovery factor if you dive into the spreadsheet, because they use a dimensionless curve, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and they shut off injection after 3 pore volumes. And that happens to line up on the dimensionless curve at 18.5% recovery. But that's something I had to uncover. I never saw any discussion of the recovery factor.
Why don't you walk through these points here that you identified as issues with your economic analysis?
Okay. So the first assumption that stuck out to me was that for every pattern that this spreadsheet uses, they calculate the hydrocarbon pore volume based on 400 feet of thickness times a 30% oil saturation. And I specifically had you ask at the deposition, where does that exist? And the answer was, it's at the top of the San Andres. So I took that and relied on it and went, and you'll see I did some alternative calculations using the 400 feet top of the San Andres that our experts looked at. But in the last day or so, we've heard testimony that, well, it's not really the top 400 feet. It could be 1,500 feet, and that's just the net 400 feet, and the spreadsheet doesn't care if it's net or gross. Well, the spreadsheet doesn't care, but the field's going to care when you inject CO2 in 1,500 feet or anything bigger than 400. You're going to need much more CO2, and it won't be as effective as the dimensionless curve says, because you're going to lose a lot of CO2 into non-productive intervals. So when I heard that, I thought, well, I really don't like these economics because of the inputs, but now they've become totally irrelevant.
You mentioned it took you some uncovering to figure out how Mr. West calculated oil recovery. Part of his economic analysis also included CO2 recovery, as you heard from his testimony. How did you ascertain Mr. West calculated his analysis for CO2 recovery as part of his economic analysis?
We had to look in the model, in the spreadsheet model, the same way we did to figure out the oil recovery. There's another dimensionless curve in there that relates CO2 injection on a hydrocarbon pore volume basis with CO2 production. That's important for the economics because they use it to say, hey, I'm getting some recycle here that I don't have to buy. So it limits the amount of CO2 that's required for purchase. It's a really important economic parameter. There's no discussion of where that curve comes from, the legitimacy of it, how it would apply to 400 continuous feet, let alone 1,500 feet of San Andres for flooding. So I still don't really know where that came from. It's in the model. It's got a curve. It's got a equation that they use to fit that curve, but that's it.
Now, this is something that Dr. Lake was going to address as more specifically in his testimony. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Now, is it your understanding that this economic model presented by Empire is its evidence that waste is occurring in the San, or would occur in the San Andres ROZ?
Well, I've either sat through or listened to everything that's happened so far. This is the only information I've seen that directly relates to an estimate of waste.
And that would be for the San Andres ROZ.
That's correct.
Why don't you walk us through the last, I think, did you talk about the last 2 points here?
Let me back up and hit that second one again. So once we found that dimensionless curve, I think I asked you to ask Empire the source of it. We were provided two things. We got an SPE paper that's identified there, and we also got a presentation from the same authors that had largely the same info. That paper was a scoping paper for the state of Wyoming to figure out how much, if we flooded every field in Wyoming, both immiscible and miscible, how much CO2 do we need on an instantaneous rate and how much do we need total? And they developed some formulas for that. The point is the paper had nothing to do with ROZ, had nothing to do with New Mexico ROZ. It has one curve in there that's labeled San Andres, and it doesn't say where that came from. So that's the source of the curve. Let me hit the last two here. The oil prices in the economics are escalated. They start out at $75. They escalate 1%, and that's the only price run they made. We've had very low prices recently, and when you escalate that price out to the end of these economics, it's close to $120. So it seems to me, if you're trying to capture certainty, you need to have some other runs. So I've redone some price decks that are flat and with some futures prices. Then the last thing has to do with the CO2 price. CO2 price is in the model because it's the biggest cost in the CO2 flood. It's bigger than capital expenses. And the assumed price is $1 an MCF. The way they get to that is they say, we think the price today is $1.50, and we think there's a 50-cent credit for 45Q tax credits, but that's it. It's just an assumption. My understanding of the 45Q tax credits is that you have to have anthropogenic CO2, or you have to get it from a coal-fired power plant or pull it out of the atmosphere. I think starting with $1.50 is really low, and then taking the 50 cents off is speculative. I don't know anybody who's actually got one of those projects approved yet.
No,
So that's it on those.
I think your next slides go into these a little bit more detail, correct?
Yes.
Okay, what's this one relate to?
I kind of jumped the gun and described this. This is the Wyoming paper. It's clear that it's not about residual oil saturation zones or residual oil zones, and it's really not about the Permian or New Mexico. Another point I'll make about this, the paper was written, I believe, in 2009 from memory. It was before 2010. And so we didn't have a whole lot of ROZ projects at that point, maybe a handful. So it's likely that if I bend over backwards and think about what this curve represents, it's more than likely, if it's based on data, it's going to be based on main pay information, which is different than ROZ. And then one final point, you can see on the x-axis that it's labeled cumulative WAG, so CO2 plus water injection in hydrocarbon pore volumes. So it's a WAG dimensionless curve. And we heard from Mr. West that his model is modeling continuous injection. So it's different.
What's this next slide?
This is the CO2 production curve that has we just don't know where it came from. But you can see that at one pore volume of injected CO2, that's the x-axis. And I apologize, this is how it exists in the model. It doesn't have labels. You get back or produce 95% of a pore volume. Seems like a really high return. You're only losing 5% of the CO2. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
I know I referenced that Dr. Lake was going to address this, but based on your review of Dr. Lake's work and your understanding, just as a preview, why do you believe that seems like a high rate of return for that?
Well, it's the same one pore volume of injection. You go back to we won't go back to it, but I'll tell you what the number is. At one pore volume of CO2 injection, you've recovered 11% pore volume of oil. So it seems like there's 6% pore volume missing. It's kind of non-physical. I don't know what happened to that other 6%. Seems like it would have been filled up with CO2.
Anything further on this slide, Mr. McVeigh?
No.
How about this next slide? What does this show about your analysis of the economic model presented by Empire?
So this is a chart of oil prices. The red and the green lines that run up over time are the assumptions in, those are the assumptions in Mr. West's model. You've got the green line is for the 72 pattern, doesn't take quite as long to implement. And the red line is for the 250 pattern model that includes MSU-B, additional MSU patterns, and AGU patterns. The other two lines are my sensitivity runs. I put in a flat run starting at the same price that he did, $75. And then I went to the futures market when I ran this, which was leading up to my rebuttal testimony for a 30-day period, which is typically how we analyze futures prices to take volatility out of the curve. And you can see that at that point in time, and still today, the futures market is cautious about oil prices. Then at that point in time when I ran it, it was in the low 60s. So I've implemented those prices into my revised runs.
What's this next slide show?
This is the results for the 72 pattern analysis, where I've gone into Mr. West's spreadsheet and I've done three things to it. I've gone in and I've adjusted the porosity, I've adjusted the oil saturation, and I've adjusted the CO2 price. Well, I say three things. I've also adjusted the prices too. So four things under two different price decks. The first column, I wish I could point at this, but could you point at the middle column where they're highlighted in yellow? Yes. Yeah, that's minus $24 million. Prior to the adjustments, if you go up to above that, you can see Mr. West's answer was that the 72 pattern was going to make $262 million. So I changed porosity, not very much. His was 10, I changed it to 9.35. And I'll talk about why I changed that and how I changed that in a minute. I changed the oil saturation to 10.39 from his 30%. And then I made two different runs, $75 a barrel constant, which results in a loss of $24 million. Then on the futures market, which has those decreasing prices out over time, the loss is $84 million. Let me take a pause for a minute and talk about why I made those adjustments. So he said in his deposition that he was looking at the top 400 feet of the San Andres. So I took the log analysis from our experts, from Netherlands, Sewells and Associates, Dr. Davidson, and I tallied up the average porosity and the average oil saturation in the top 400 of the San Andres, and I substituted it. And so Dr. Davidson will talk about how he got to those results, but this is a sensitivity. that doesn't just assume a 30% oil saturation. It's based on analysis. So those change the hydrocarbon pore volume. For each 40-acre pattern, you've gone down to about a third of the hydrocarbon pore volume compared to the assumptions that Empire makes. And so that's the first column. The second column of numbers has an additional correction, and that's changing the CO2 price back to the $1.50. And that's just removing the tax credit that's assumed and going with $1.50. And the results of that are below, where the $75 per barrel constant oil price loses about $66.5 million, and the futures price deck loses $127 million.
You did a similar analysis for the 72 pattern, correct?
I did, yes, on the
And
next
that's
slide.
the next slide.
Yep, I won't go over all those because the changes were the same in the model. It's just using his 250 pattern model. He said they're going to make $585 million. That's a present worth number. But when you make the corrections for just porosity and oil saturation under the two price decks, you lose $86 million with $75 oil, or you lose $215 million with the futures price deck. Similarly, when you roll in the CO2 price, you lose either $176 million or $307 million.
Mr. Macbeth, you heard today testimony. This was on an assumption of a 400-foot interval, correct?
Mine?
Yep.
Yes.
And you heard today that Empire is actually looking at injecting CO2 across a 1,200 or 1,500-foot interval across the entire San Andreas.
I heard allusions to that. Yes.
Okay. How would that affect your analysis here, your alternative pricing scenarios, if you were to actually try to implement this CO2 recovery across a 1,500-foot interval?
1,500 interval with 400 net. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
I don't know that I could use this model the way it is. You could leave the 400. That would properly calculate the hydrocarbon pore volume of the oil. The problem would be on the CO2 side, because when you inject, there's no way to tell the CO2 just to go into the zones that you're worried about. The CO2 is going to go into the zones that make up the difference between 1,500 and 400, or 1,200 and 400. So you'd have to accommodate, somehow change the model to triple or quadruple the amount of CO2 you need, because you're going to lose a lot of it.
And explain, if you would, you were here for Ops Geologic's testimony about how, about what they found in terms of where the highest oil saturations were located in the San Andreas.
You'll have to show me the document. Okay. I don't remember that.
Okay, very well. Do you recall that the testimony was that the highest oil saturations from Ops Geologic were in the lowest porosity intervals?
Oh, I do recall that. Yes.
Yeah. So how would that square with this attempt to flood the San Andreas?
Well, you bring up a good point. The model uses an average porosity, but if we've got saturations that vary dramatically with porosity, it seems like the model needs to recognize that and maybe calculate pore volume on more of a packet basis, where you could incorporate the right porosity with the right saturation.
Anything further on these pricings?
No.
What do these next series of slides show about your economic pricing scenarios?
We can go through these next two pretty quickly, because they're just a visual representation of what I've just shown on the previous corrections. This is the 72 pattern calculation. The red line is over time how Mr. West's analysis adds up to about $262 million of net present value. And then you can see below zero over time are my corrections under various assumptions.
So that's just tweaking the few variables you showed that the economic model couldn't be economic.
That's true. Porosity, oil saturation, CO2 price, and then we've got the two different price decks.
And this is your chart for the 250 pattern CO2 injection plan.
That's right. Similar results, but scaled up. to the 250 pattern model, whereas Mr. West's analysis approaches $600 million net present value. When you make those corrections, all of the results are losing money to various degrees, as shown below.
Now, the next series of slides, Mr. Macbeth, I think we get into Dr. Buckwalter's reservoir model. Just if you would give us an overview of what this slide shows and what you're going to be talking about.
So what I'm going to talk about is how, as I've studied Dr. Buckwalter's model, listened to his testimony, listened to the conclusions that he's drawn from its results, how I've tried to keep in mind all of the data that I know about, that I've looked at, and contrast it with what he used in the model to build his model and then to run his results with history matches and future predictions. So his model is relatively simple. It's only got 10 layers. The layers are thick in some places. He was really intent on matching the oil in place, which I'm not sure that was a really good way to go, because we know that there was a lot of uncertainty about the oil in place. If you go into the unitization hearing from '84, they sort of complain about the quality of the logs that they had because many of the wells from the 30s and 40s. So he kind of forced the model to fit that original oil in place. One of the things he did was to drop the oil water contact from either 325 or 350 down to 366. That has the effect of killing a lot of water. I mean, that might be the reason why he had trouble finding water in the Grayburg. But he did that. I didn't see a justification for it. I would think that one of the things that an operator would know, even in the 30s and 40s, is a contact. You'd know that in a wellbore. You don't really know what the OOIP is, but that was something that he used as a linchpin to make the model fit that. So
Next slide.
Yep. So the first thing I wanted to show, I sat here and I listened to Dr. Lindsay's discussion of principally the Grayburg. He talked about, I think it was 87 different zones in the Grayburg, with intervals that don't produce, intervals that do produce, different stratigraphy. And I think about that compared to the 5 layers that Dr. Buckwalter has in the Grayburg, and there's no way that the model's going to capture the complexities that Dr. Lindsay talked about in the geologic model. So that's, put them side by side to show that, but I think it's pretty obvious.
Explain this next slide and how it relates to your criticisms of Dr. Buckwalter's analysis.
So here's some details. There's been a lot of questions about what were the permeabilities that Dr. Buckwalter used, and maybe there was some confusion over the last couple of days, but I pulled these directly out of the model. So these are the permeabilities, horizontal and vertical, in the model. And the one we'll have to talk about is the one labeled variable, because that doesn't tell you much. But let me go a little bit further into this. He's got, stay over on the porosity side. He's got constant porosity up in the Penrose of 6%. He's got 8% on average in the Grayburg, but variable. We've looked at those grid ranges. It is variable, but it's not that much change. I mean, if you think about a bell curve, I think the lowest porosities are 6 and the highest are 12. It's not much of a range of porosities, but it is variable. And on average, it's 8. But the confusing thing is he's got variable porosity, but constant permeability. I don't think I've ever seen that in reality. I would have expected both to be variable. They're somewhat related, but he's got it in the model as, at least horizontally, he's got constant permeability in the Grayburg. We move down to the San Andres. You can see he's got a constant porosity of about 6.4%. I've talked to the folks on our team that have done the log analysis, and they say that's very low for the San Andreas. Now we move over to the permeability, and I was prepared to say today that the range of permeabilities that Dr. Buckwalter used to connect up layers 7 and 8 was 0.1 to 12.8, because that's what the documents have that I've got. I've got output from his model. Apparently, though, he must have used a multiplier that's buried in his model that we don't have access to. Mr. West put up a helpful slide that showed that range is more like as high as in one cell, a Darcy, down to much lower. But those are enormous changes to make. The rest of the San Andreas is zero. The rest of the connection between 7 and 8 is zero. So you've got zones around particular wells where they drastic modifications in the vertical permeability, and at levels that I was surprised to hear about today. Those are really high. And the change is not made just at the wellbore. The change is made in the entire block, which is about 2 acres.
And Mr. Macbeth, we'd asked for those output documents from Dr. Buckwalter, correct?
We did. We had to ask for them, and we got, I know there's a lot of output from that model, and even now, some of it with the wrong starting pressure, I wouldn't care that I had it at this point. But we got some initial grids that show what's happening in the realization of the model. We got 1986, where I pulled some of the other things that I'll show you, but we don't have every time step. We can't get pressure at every point in the model, because the only output pressure if you had a well in the cell, and you don't have wells in every cell.
Anything more that you want to address or discuss on this slide?
One other thing, and this may come up with other witnesses as our case goes on. We see the level of the permeability that he's using, upwards of 500 millidarcies in the Grayberg. Now, I know that in models, you often have to increase the permeability by some factor to make it work, because we're scaling up well level measurements to field-wide measurements. But typical scale-up factors are 8 to 12 times. And when I've looked at the permeability that I see, particularly in one early published paper about the field, you've got porosities that are below a millidarcy that go up to maybe in the tens of millidarcies. I don't see any justification to take the Grayberg up to 500 millidarcies for horizontal permeability.
One thing before we move off the slide, Mr. Macbeth, you and I were discussing previously some of the other factors that maybe were instituted in this model that may have contributed to the Grayberg's lack of water. You mentioned one being pushing down the oil water contact. Tell us, there may be one or two others that we discussed, if you would just touch on them before we move off this slide.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are two other things that were done in the model that I think kind of precluded Grayberg water from being a source of supply. One is pushing the oil water contact down. You're losing a lot of water that could have provided some of the water that he's struggling to find. And it conflicts with the published oil water contact that we have in reports from the earlier operators. He also used, in my view, and I think we'll hear from Dr. Lake about this a little bit more, a pretty high irreducible water saturation, conflicted with what was published in the unitization hearing. So that freezes up water too, doesn't allow it to move. Then the final thing, if you look into the model, you look at the grids, he's got 0 net to gross, or basically nulled out grids to the east in the Grayberg that prevents water from moving from the east, basically prevents the edgewater that's talked about in some of the Chevron papers.
Anything further on these, this slide?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Anything further on this slide?
No.
Okay. Next slide over here. I think you had a few comments on some additional criticisms of Dr. Buckwalter.
Yes, so this was something that came up at his deposition. And he, basically the assumption in the model is that any place there was an oil zone, he assumed that an operator would have completed the whole oil zone. So in the model, he lets any well that is producing, it has to have scheduled production for that to occur. He allows it to produce from any zone in the model that's got oil saturation. But we know, in fact, the way that the field was developed was that individual zones were perforated and produced, depleted. Then there were plugbacks, there were deepenings, there were workovers. And so he didn't honor what actually came out of the ground and came out of different formations. He let them all produce. So that has the effect of really messing up the history match, because that scheduled production, that's the one thing that you kind of know happened. Stuff came out of the well at the surface, and he's letting it come out of all zones within the model, whereas it came out of discrete zones, in fact, in wells. So you've got fluids moving around in the model that really didn't move around, in fact. And the last, on this slide, there's a reference to after unitization, there were like 270 workovers that included deepening wells, working on wells, reperforating, things like that.
Got it. Anything further on this particular slide?
No.
Okay. Let us know what this slide shows and how it relates to your response to the
Okay.
stimulation.
So based on reviewing all of Dr. Buckwalter's work, based on listening to him testify about it, he has concluded that the MSU-B unit, the MSU unit, and the HEU unit all communicate. And he said that volumes move between them. And I suspect it's a function of dropping this oil water contact down. I'm not sure if it's real or not, but we know that surrounding at least the MSU-B to the north, there are these other units that have production. So if MSU-B talks to MSU, talks to AGU, why wouldn't they talk to these other units? So if he's going to take that position, these other units and wells need to be in his model too, and they're not. There's just no production, no wells. There's reservoir out there in his model, but it doesn't have any wells in.
And these other wells or production that you're referencing, are they solely Grayburg production?
No, in fact, this was referenced in Mr. West's discussion. He had talked about a field far to the north. And I think this morning he referenced San Andres production out of the North Monument. That's a source of withdrawal out of the San Andres. So leaving all these things out of the model, just take the model farther and farther away from reality and take the results of it farther and farther away from reliability.
I think you have a slide that will address some of those concepts later, but let's go to your next slide. Anything further on this one?
Only that I took this image from one of Empire's exhibits. It's noted there.
What does this next slide refer to?
Okay, this came up earlier this morning too. This is an example of the database we were given from Empire that shows we only have monthly production resolution back to 1970. Prior to that, there's a single cumulative number that represents all the production that occurred for this well up to 1970. So I think at one point, when the commissioners were asking Dr. Buckwalter a question, they said, when did the water start? And he said, right away. Well, it started right away in the model. I'll give you that, but he told it to start right away. We don't know for each well when that cum occurred, and that's 40 years of production. It might have happened in the last 5. It might have happened at the beginning. It might have happened over the whole time period. That's a serious flaw in the model. I don't know that there's anything you can do about it. but it puts uncertainty on the results in my mind.
Yeah, that's just a limiting factor based on the available data, correct?
That's right. Absolutely.
And now just in relation, just how much of the history of the production data are we talking about that is based on cumulative data?
So you've got, he says he starts the production in 39, let's just call it 1940. So you've got 30 years of production before, and then he goes forward in time, to current. So it's a little less than half.
Anything further on this slide?
No.
Okay. What's this next one show?
We're going to get back to RFTs. You guys are going to think I'm in love with RFTs, but they're important because it's real data that we have. I talked about how the RFT measurements undercut what Mr. West has said, but it's also important to think about them when looking at Dr. Buckwalter's model. So I described earlier that we had some limited information about the model. We were able to go into some of the output that we were given that gave us the gross, basically the tops of different models. And we can take the difference between these tops and calculate the gross thickness in different intervals. So the interval 7 that's shown on the left-hand side of the page, that's the interval for most of those RFT measurements, where everything except the deepest one, all of those measurements were made where I showed 11 feet, you had a couple of hundred PSI difference, you have 150 PSI over 20 feet, and those really big pressure differences that occurred over small depth differences in the model. The highlighted number in that layer 7 grid, which is 65 feet, that's the location. I've only cut out a little piece of the grid because it's huge. That's the location of the 211. So at the 211, layer 7 is 65 feet thick. So there's no way that his model could ever accurately represent the real pressure differences that we see from those RFT measurements. We move over to the right-hand side of the page. That's the thickness of layer 8, which is what he calls San Andreas in his model. And it's about 465 feet. So again, you can't represent the difference in pressure that you see between those last two RFT measurements when you have this thick of cells in the model, because the way the model works is at every time step, you have a material balance and equilibrium, and in effect, absent gravity, you have about the same pressure in the whole cell. So the whole 65 feet has about the same pressure, except for gravity effects. And same thing in the 465. This model will never represent what is really shown in those RFTs.
Anything further on this slide?
No.
Now, Mr. Macbeth, previously you were talking about some of the issues or concerns you had about excluding immediately offsetting production data from Dr. Buckwalter's model. I think this next slide raises a broader concern about some of the assumptions about the size of the San Andreas in particular. If you would just review for us what the point of this slide is and how it relates to your assessment of the simulation.
Right. So earlier today, the question of boundaries came up and what's an appropriate boundary to consider around the MSU. So I listened to Mr. Melzer's testimony after the fact when I got home on YouTube. And I went into his exhibit, which I couldn't really see that well because it's small, fine lines, but I zoomed in and I highlighted all of the fairways that looked like they were connected to the location of the MSU. And I wanted to show that because the scale of this fairway, which under his theory of how an ROZ would occur, has to do with pathways, migration pathways, and water moving from one place to another. So those zones are connected. Otherwise, the fluid won't move. If we compare that to the size of the aquifer that Dr. Buckwalter attached to his model, sounds big in a vacuum, 38 miles by 17 miles, but it's tiny in comparison to the actual San Andreas zone that is connected across, 2 counties in New Mexico and then onward into Texas. So this is a huge zone that 1 mile or 2 miles around MSU is not an appropriate boundary.
I want to ask you, Mr. Macbeth, just to kind of, square this concept with some of the data and some of the analysis you've heard and read and the testimony. And I'm thinking in particular about the results we're seeing and have read about from the water supply wells that produce from the EMSU and in the water disposal wells that Goodnight operates in particular. And if you would, just at a high level, because I know there's other experts who are going to testify on that, just for the purposes of the commission, relate your understanding of how that data squares with and relates to what you just told us about the size of the San Andres here in these fairways.
So the productive characteristics of the water supply wells and the injectivity of the disposal wells tell us that we're connected to an enormous reservoir. And I'd add Rice to the list that you just told us about. The water supply wells were able to produce continuously for long, long periods of time without any reduction in their deliverability. So they must be connected to a very high volume, large aquifer. Conversely, when we go to the disposal side in the same zone, I had an interview with Rice. They told me that they have seen no changes in their capacity to dispose of water on a vacuum in their wells for decades. So if the reservoir pressure is changing, it can't be that the reservoir pressure is changing if there's no change in the injectivity of those wells. Similarly, with Goodnight's wells, large volumes are able to be disposed of with essentially no changes in the well deliverability.
So I guess just to draw this all together, then the point of this slide conceptually is that what we're talking about is a giant ocean.
When you don't even have to believe me, you can look at their own expert who says this is the pathway and this is all connected.
Anything further on this slide?
No.
Explain what we're seeing here.
So this is a busy slide. I didn't make it, so I'll explain what I think it says. But I think this is a concept of how to flood vertically with horizontal wells. Mr. Melzer specifically said there's no analog for this, that it's an untested concept. I don't think it's appropriate here with all of the differences we've seen in the RFTs showing that we do not have connections. Witnesses talked about how you rely on vertical fractures for this concept. And we can see in those pressure measurements that the zones are holding large pressures. In other words, I can't square vertical fractures with the pressures we see in those RFTs that are not connected. So I don't think this is a reasonable concept to implement here.
And here, they're talking about what thickness of reservoir interval is this being applied to in this instance?
It's noted as greater than 250 feet thick.
And it's not clear. Is it clear how that this could be applied to an interval of 1,200 to 1,500 feet thick?
Not just based on this diagram, no.
Anything further on this slide?
No.
Okay. What's this next slide show?
This next slide is another topic that Mr. Melzer touched on. In the middle of the slide, I've got a cut out of an exhibit that I pulled from the tall cotton hearing that was done. Been a lot of talk about tall cotton as an analogy. And I wanted to, there's been a lot of questions about what are ROZ recovery factors. That's a difficult question because there's not a lot of data available publicly. In Texas, most of the ROZs, if not all, are commingled with main pay ROZs. And in Texas, if you have a unit, you get one production number for the whole unit for the month. So trying to figure out even incrementally what an added ROZ project will do to a curve there's a lot of uncertainty and it's difficult to do. But in tall cotton, we do have an opportunity to look at the production because all of it's related to ROZ. And we've got some published information about the oil in place. So you can infer some residual oil zone recovery factors. And I wanted to attempt to answer that question. But before I do that, there was some implication that ROZ or that Tall Cotton was a successful project. Based on what they had planned to get and said they were going to get, it really was not. It had some really lower recoveries than they expected. So let me go through that first. The number that I've circled, 19 million barrels under one section, was identified by Kinder Morgan in a hearing where they were asking for some regulatory relief. And they said that relates to a 400-foot thick interval. I scaled that up because they ultimately found that they had a 450-foot interval. I scaled that up from 400 to 450, and I scaled the 640 acres, the whole section, down to the acres that they had at Tall Cotton, which was coincidentally also 450. So that 19 million barrels becomes about 15 million barrels under Kinder Morgan's assessment. All I've done is scale it, of ROZ recoverable oil to the CO2 injection process. Let's go to the next slide and I'll compare that to what I think they got. So I have plotted the publicly available data for the Tall Cotton project, and I've made a simple rate cum plot and extrapolated that. I've been conservative. I've said, let's allow them to go down to a zero rate, which is probably not going to happen. But if they're allowed to go down to a zero rate, they can get their max EUR out of that project is about 6.4 million barrels of oil. Compare that back to my normalized recoverable ROZ that they expected, 15.03. They've gotten less than half of what they thought they were going to get. So it's not successful. And by the way, that project is not on 40 acres. It's on more like 10 acre spacing. So all of the economics that you've looked at from Empire, that's assuming a 40 acre spacing. So the recovery factor is going to be below 40, will be less than 10 because you're contacting less intervals. I want to do one thing. I want to go back one slide and make another comparison. If you move up in that matrix, there's a 63 number. That's the oil in place. We need that number to also be scaled, and I'm not going to bore you with the math, but if you scale that 63 million barrels to the right thickness and the right acreage, you end up with almost exactly 50 million barrels of oil in place in the ROZ. You compare that 50 million to the 6.4 we've seen on the extrapolated production curve, that math gets really easy because 50, if you double it, becomes 100. If you double 6.4, you're at 12.8. So that's about the recovery factor at Tall Cotton.
Anything further on either of these two slides?
No.
Okay. Explain what you're seeing on this side. You mentioned that you had interviewed somebody from Rice Operating. Explain who you spoke to and why you did.
Sure. So on March 26th, I had a conference call meeting with Mr. Scott Curtis, who I guess at one point was going to testify and ultimately not. But I think the resolution of that was that we were allowed to talk to him and perhaps add to our testimony. And that's what I'm doing here. I talked to Mr. Curtis about his wells. I talked to him about the history of his wells, his experience with drilling wells, and his experience with whether his wells' disposal capacity has changed over time. And what I'm really thinking about is Dr. Buckwalter's model has already told us that he believes the San Andreas has started increasing in pressure, depending on which run you look at of his, as early as 2018. So if the pressure has started going up in the San Andreas in reality, then people who are connected to that zone should see effects on their wells. And Mr. Curtis reported they dispose of their water by just on a vacuum, pouring the water into the well, in effect. And the way they test it is occasionally they load the well continuously, measure the volume over a particular period of time to see what the max disposal rate is. And absent well problems, like you're having to clean up a well bore or get fill out of a well. Absent those things, he has seen no reduction in his well's max capacity over time, which means the reservoir pressure hasn't changed.
And your understanding from Mr. Curtis is that Rice has been able to inject on vacuum for the entire history of its disposal operations.
That's right. That's right.
And that's true. Did they use pumps or compression for any of their wells? Is that your under?
No, it's just, I mean, literally don't dump it in the well, but it's just disposed of by vacuum, on a vacuum.
Anything further on this slide?
You know, the last comment there about comparing this pressure to Dr. Buckwalter's model, I'm not concerned about that because of this change in the pressure. We know that many of his runs really don't have any reliable results.
Did you want to comment on the EME H20 well data that we got from the data survey?
Sure. So that well had a measurement. I think it's the oldest measurement we have in the San Andres, 1959. If you look at the history of the well, the measurement is made just 4 days after the log is run. So this is, in all likelihood, prior to injection. I mean, this is our best measurement in the San Andres. The measurement at 5,000 feet, the pressure is 1,800 PSI. If you do the math, the gradient's about 0.36. I mean, most of the gradients, when you look at them, 1450 even, go find that well bore, find its depth that measurement would be made at. It's about 0.37. Some of the recent pressures we see in the Goodnight wells, 0.38. I mean, the pressures haven't changed very much at all over time. It really conflicts with the theory that looks to the RFT measurement at 1245, 4006, that there's been a big decrease in pressure in the disposal zone.
Based on that, you're saying, Mr. Macbeth, that it doesn't appear that there's been any change or any effect on the reservoir pressure within the San Andres over all these decades.
Not based on the data I've looked at, no. If it is, it's very minor.
Okay. And if you would just conceptually relate that back to our discussion about the size and scale of the San Andres, just briefly, so we.
Well, it makes sense when you think about the ability of the wells to dispose of fluid, large volumes that haven't changed over time, the ability of the water supply wells to produce for long periods of time without any degradation in their deliverability. You must have a very, very large reservoir for that to occur.
Mr. Macbeth, moving on to your last slide here, these are your conclusions. If you would just summarize at a high level your final opinions on where you stand today.
So based on everything I've looked at and listened to their side, read all the testimony that I've reviewed, I have not seen any credible or direct measurement evidence of a viable economic ROZ project. The log analysis that was provided that I looked at and compared with actual tests just doesn't square with the real data. It's wildly optimistic. That's the first conclusion. The second one is that both of their witnesses, Mr. West and Dr. Buckwalter, rely on very scant data, none of which, in the case of Dr. Buckwalter, was actually made in the San Andres disposal zone, which is the zone we ought to be concerned about, the zone that Goodnight is disposing into. The RFT measurements we've gone over a bunch of times, those large pressure differences over very small depth differences in the well tells us there are not connections vertically in the wells where they measured that. And then the Empire economics, the ROZ flood economics, which I suppose is their evidence of potential waste, I believe is not reliable and has many inputs that are unsupported and are unreasonable. And when you correct those, they drive the project economics negative. And then we've just gone over the Dr. Buckwalter information where he's failed to incorporate actual known data and complexities into the model. And therefore, any conclusions that you draw from the model are really suspect. And then finally, my overall conclusion is based on everything I've seen, obviously it's the commission's decision, but I don't see the evidence to support a drastic change in the status quo, which was the use of the San Andreas disposal zone for over 60 years. There's just no direct evidence of any effect between the disposal and the production of Empire in the MSU.
Do you have an opinion, Mr. Macbeth, about whether Empire's production operations and Goodnight Midstream's disposal zone are in communication?
Well, I certainly haven't seen any direct evidence of that. And based on the characteristics of the wells that we know that are in the disposal zone, and the fact that we don't see any effect on the MSU production curve, on the total volume of fluid that's being produced, it's staying about the same. It looks to me like they can coexist, stay out of each other's way, as long as Goodnight stays in the disposal zone, and anything that happens above the interval where we drilled through and had losses, they go do what they want.
Do you have an opinion about whether, I think you addressed it just now, whether Goodnight's injection is impairing in any way Empire's correlative rights in the Grayburg zone or the zone above Goodnight's injection?
I mean, that's a follow-on of the opinion that there's no connection between the two. And I've been confusing. Some witnesses have said if you inject into a ROZ zone, nothing moves. Other witnesses have said it pushes oil off the lease. Well, I thought it was an ROZ zone. So I don't see how correlative rights could be impaired by simply injecting into an ROZ zone where the oil, an alleged ROZ zone where the oil can't move.
Any opinion about whether Goodnight's injection is causing waste?
I certainly haven't seen evidence of that. I don't believe so.
And I wanted just to touch on, I mentioned this or asked this question, but I don't think you answered it. But have you been involved in cases where SWDs have actually been shut down by an agency?
I have, yes.
And what kind of evidence or what were the facts that were presented that caused a shutdown in those cases?
Direct.
We have an objection. None of this is disclosed. None of this is disclosed in the witness statements. We haven't received any documents on this. So all of this is brand new. We've never been provided it. We object that this was due long ago if this is the tack they wanted to take.
Response?
I will try the question. It's part of his experience that he brings to the table. And if it's a problem for them to hear it, then, I don't have to ask it.
Okay. All right. That solves the problem.
Mr. Macbeth, you've heard the commission grappling today with its questions and over the weeks with weighty issues that are before it. But I think you kind of answered this question, but I want to ask just, are Empire's existing and potential ROZ development and Goodnight's injection into the San Andreas disposal zone mutually exclusive in your opinion?
In my opinion, they're not. I believe they can coexist.
What's your commission sitting here, I think, looking for recommendations from both Empire's witnesses and experts and Goodnight's witnesses and experts. Given all that you've seen and heard and based on your experience, do you have a recommendation for what the commission should do in terms of the status quo?
I don't see any reason to change the status quo. The commission obviously has ongoing jurisdiction. Should something change, we're not saying that this is the end of the analysis. If anything changes and new data became available, I suspect it would be brought to your attention. But as I sit here, I have not seen direct evidence of any effect of Goodnight's operations on Empire's operations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Macbeth. At this time, Mr. Hearing Officer, I have no further questions of the witness and make them available for cross-examination.
All right, it's almost 2:00. Why don't we take a 15-minute break? Let's see, we'll call it 1:55. Let's be back at 10 after 2 since we're short on time this afternoon. Ready in the back there, Ms. Apodaca?
Yes, we're ready.
Ms. Tejas? All right, are we back on the record then? I'll take silence as a yes. All right, Mr. Waymire, are you doing the cross?
Yes, Corey Waymeyer for Empire.
All right, Mr. Macbeth, I'll just remind you, you're under oath.
Thank you.
Oh, before we proceed though, doing the arithmetic, we've got just about an hour and a half left for cross-examination, not only of Empire, but everyone else, and then questions from the commission. So in all likelihood, we will have to have this witness come back somehow, even if it's just virtually. Mr. Rankin, can you provide some insights on that?
Thank you for asking, Mr. Hearing Officer. Yeah, I discussed with counsel, Mr. Macbeth will be available virtually when this hearing resumes. However, he won't be able to be in person. When he does appear virtually, his wife will have undergone knee replacement surgery, and he's the primary caregiver. So just to ask for some accommodations in terms of his ability to go check on her and maybe some occasionally longer breaks so he can make sure that she has what she needs. But other than that, he'll be available for a cross as long as Mr. Waymire or any of the other parties, including the commission, have questions of him.
Okay, any problem with that from Empire?
No objection from Empire.
Anyone else? OCD, Rice?
No objection from OCD at all.
No objection from Rice.
No objection from Pilot.
All right. Okay, without further ado, Mr. Waymire, take it away.
Thank you. Mr. Macbeth, I want to start a little bit with your experience and background. As you discuss that with Mr. Rankin, have you ever actually worked with an oil and gas producer in-house?
In-house, no.
So if the commission wanted to know about any of your experience in-house with an operator on an EOR project, a CO2 project, an ROZ project, or just even primary recovery, you couldn't tell the commission about any experience like that in-house with a producer, could you?
Well, I've reviewed many in-house documents as part of the study I was describing about tracking CO2 from Bravo Dome and McElmo Dome. Some of those were studies that predated any of the Wasson original Denver unit information. So although I have never worked for an operator, I have worked hand in hand with them as a consultant. And I think my experience covers multiple operators in that realm.
So circling back to my actual question, which was if the commission wanted to hear about experience you had actually working in-house for a producer, you couldn't tell them about any of that kind of experience, could you?
If in-house experience is the relevant question, I cannot say anything about that.
Now, in terms of the tail end of your testimony, you used a phrase several times, and I want to focus in on it to make sure I understand. You said that you haven't seen, quote, direct evidence, and you used that phrase 3 times. What is direct evidence?
Actual measurements like pressure, effects on production, all of the information that I've seen are inferences, calculations of a simulation that we've shown have got numerous input problems. So that's an indirect measurement.
I know you have not testified at the OCC or the OCD before. It is not your suggestion that this commission is somehow limited to quote unquote direct evidence as opposed to circumstantial or other inferential evidence in making a decision, is it?
I think the commission can decide what evidence they will look at.
Additionally, you used in response to the closing questions for Mr. Rankin, the phrase waste several times. You spoke of protection of correlative rights. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Those are phrases that you're familiar with.
Those are phrases that I use and I have an understanding of them.
Additionally, production and paying quantities is a phrase that you use. Yes.
Absolutely.
You're very familiar with production and paying quantities.
You know I am.
Production and paying quantities would constitute an economic analysis that would exclude CapEx expenditures and give only consideration merely to recurrent revenue against recurrent expense. Is that right?
Production and paying quantities is an analysis that relates to a producing well and whether or not that well can hold a lease. I don't see any applicability of production and paying quantities in the realm of a future project like ROZ.
If you'll just listen to my question, in every context, you've understood the phrase production and paying quantities. It has required all exclusion of CapEx expenditures and would only give consideration to both actual and anticipated recurrent revenue against recurrent expense. True?
Anticipated?
Prong 2 of a production and paying quantities analysis.
So you're talking about the pattern jury charge in Texas?
And I'm actually going to show you a different state as well. But as my question is, based on your experience, production and paying quantities excludes all capital expenditure and gives consideration only to recurrent revenue and recurrent expense, both actual and anticipated in the future.
Mr. Hearing Officer, I'm objecting to this question. It's outside the scope of Mr. Macbeth's direct testimony and my examination of him. He makes no reference to produce PPQ analysis in any of his assessments or in any of his testimony, and I didn't ask him about it.
Well, he testified at length about his views on the economics of the proposed CO2 EOR project. So I think the door is wide open. I'll overrule the objection.
Can you repeat it?
Of course, with respect to all of your experience in the history of time with production and paying quantities, that would require exclusion of all capital expenditure and consideration be given only to recurrent revenue against recurrent expense, both actual and anticipated. Isn't that true?
That is true, but also all of my experience relates to existing producing wells trying to hold a lease.
Now, if the commission wanted to know whether you've run any economic cases that would exclude consideration of capital expenditure, you haven't done that, isn't that right?
I have done the adjustments that I just testified about, and we didn't talk about capital expenditures at all.
Your model includes capital expenditures as part of the expense case, doesn't it?
Just as Mr. West does.
My question to you was, if the commission wanted to know whether you have an economic case that you've run here that would exclude capital expenditures, you have not prepared that case, have you?
I have not.
You can tell the commission that if you had prepared such a case, excluding capital expenditure, under any of the variable scenarios you changed, it would be a profitable enterprise.
Don't know without running the numbers.
Well, just because council brought up the concept of waste, it's just very high level. Are you aware that the Constitution of the state of New Mexico charges the state with protecting the natural resources for the people of the state?
No.
You know, Texas does, doesn't it?
Generally, I know that. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a shock to you if New Mexico likewise had made a part of its constitution that the state has a duty to protect for its people its precious natural resources.
Objection is asking a legal conclusion.
Overruled. It sounds to me like it's probably a quote of the language from the Constitution, which wouldn't be a legal conclusion.
That would not surprise me.
Right. And obviously, oil would be a precious natural resource of the state of New Mexico.
In the abstract, yes.
And as we bring this away from the abstract and talk concretely here on the EMSU, you can tell this commission that approximately 60% of the minerals that Empire's here fighting for is owned by the state of New Mexico. Isn't that correct?
I could only parrot what Mr. West said. I haven't studied those percentages.
You have no reason to dispute that approximately 60% of the minerals that Empire's here fighting for are owned by the state of New Mexico. Isn't that right?
I cannot dispute that.
You cannot dispute that approximately 20% of the minerals that Empire's here fighting to protect is owned by the BLM.
I wasn't paying as close attention for that number, but if you represent that to me, I don't dispute it.
With respect to, and I appreciate you saying generally you would agree with 60% is owned by the state of New Mexico and 20% by the BLM. In terms of the pore space, that this saltwater injection is entering right now. You can tell this commission that the saltwater, as we sit here right now, is entering into pore space that is owned by the state of New Mexico and Empire. Isn't that correct?
Objection, foundation. Mr. Macbeth has no knowledge of the ownership of the surface or what the laws are in New Mexico governing pore space. There's no basis for the question, and nor did I address it with him in direct examination or during his presentation.
Can you lay some more foundation?
I absolutely can. Mr. Macbeth, did you just testify in response to Mr. Rankin's direct questions that you had sat through the entirety of these proceedings as part of your expert work, less and except sometime driving on the road in which you participated by YouTube to ensure that you heard every word of testimony?
And the half day where I went back to study Buck Walter's new stuff.
Okay, so you've set, as part of your expert work in terms of taking the oath and offering opinions to this commission, you've listened to all of the witnesses.
Effectively, I have, yes.
And have you heard about the actual alleged leases here that Goodnight claims, which are about 5 acres in size?
No,
Objection.
I don't
The
remember that.
foundation, there's no basis in the record for Mr. Macbeth to know what the lease size is.
Let's take this. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sustained.
If we take this hypothetical, if hypothetically Goodnight had acquired a 5 to 10 acre surface lease from Heavens to Core, you with me so far?
From who?
From Heaven to Core,
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm with you.
you're with me so far on that hypothetical?
Yes.
You can tell this commission that within a matter of days, the saltwater injection would have gone far past that rectangular cube from Heaven to Earth and entered into other owners adjoining pore space. Isn't that right?
Objection, Mr. Hearing Officer. Mr. Macbeth has done no analysis of the radius of influence.
It's a hypothetical, overruled.
I cannot speculate on days. No.
So as part of your work here in offering opinions to this commission about what they should do by way of allowing Goodnight to continue, you haven't analyzed where is the salt water going?
No.
Doesn't that seem like an important undertaking in terms of avoidance of waste?
In my experience, that particular analysis is not part of the regulatory review when looking at applications for injection and disposal wells. Certainly isn't in Texas, and to my knowledge, it's not in New Mexico.
Earlier, Mr. Macbeth, you talked about the importance of, as a scientist, of listening to all of the information and looking at the testimony that's come in. Do you remember that?
I don't think I refer to myself as a scientist.
Would you disagree? Not a scientist?
I'm an engineer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Engineer. So help me with this. Did you make log picks here in terms of the top of the San Andreas?
Did I personally?
Yes.
There's only, I think, one instance where I looked at picks. I didn't make the picks. I referred to historical picks in some water supply wells surrounding the 211 well.
Okay. So as we talk about the concept of scientist versus engineer, you have not made any personal picks here that you would say with engineering probability, you're willing to put your hand up in that stand and say, this is the top of the San Andreas. True?
That has not been my role here. There are other witnesses that are going to talk about picks, but not my role.
Is that witness Preston McGuire?
That's probably one of them. Yeah.
On his best day, he would be an engineer. Isn't that right?
I don't recall if he's an engineer or geologist.
Now, you have worked with Goodnight in the past, haven't you?
I have a bit in the past, yes.
You've personally worked in dispute litigation matters with Goodnight?
Not matters, one other matter.
And you have a partner that's worked with Goodnight on numerous transactional matters as well?
What do you mean transactional matters?
Regulatory, something not dispute us getting to come here and fight together.
Railroad commission work, sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I remember in review of your deposition that you volunteered, and you know, you have to keep track of your past testifying engagements and who you've worked for, because all of that kind of comes back to the issue of bias and who is the guy and
Sure.
what's he done with them. Yeah.
Yes.
In your deposition, you couldn't remember what the case was that you helped Goodnight with in a dispute litigation context. You remember you couldn't recall the name?
Yes, I do remember that.
If I give the name just to see if this helps refresh your memory, was it PPC Energy LLC and Priest versus Goodnight?
No.
Are you familiar with that case?
Very vaguely. I didn't participate in it. I've read about it a little bit, but that's it.
You can tell the commission based on reading about that case that Goodnight was held accountable for committing waste of natural resources and had to pay a settlement to aggrieved mineral and producers.
Objection, Mr. Macbeth just testified that he didn't have any real personal knowledge about that case.
I don't know what the resolution of the case was.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
It's
sorry.
overruled. Go ahead.
I don't know what the resolution of the case was.
Well, tell then the commissioners what you do know about that case.
The only thing I know, I think from memory, one of my ex-partners may have been involved in it, but I don't really know that for sure. I think it was in Reeves County.
Judge Swanson, and there's now a published opinion that discusses the commission of waste and that fact that Goodnight actually settled out of it.
We're going to find out a lot more about it by looking at an opinion than what I know about the Priest case.
Can you help the commission and tell them about an experience that you've been involved in which a commercial SWD operator permitted new wells and began injecting into, as a commercial matter, a designated oil unit?
Objection, Mr. Hearing Officer. I asked Mr. Macbeth to discuss his experience with SWDs. Mr. Waymire objected and prohibited me from eliciting this testimony. Therefore, it is outside the scope of cross. I do not understand why he would be permitted to inquire on this topic, number one. Number two, the case that Mr. Waymire is referring to is a case that not in terms of bias or any concerns, Mr. Macbeth didn't work on, but his former partner did. He's not laid the foundation to establish how in any way Mr. Macbeth would be biased by the fact that his ex-partner may have worked on that case.
Well, credibility is always at issue in any case, so the objection's overruled. It'll go to the weight, not the admissibility of the testimony.
So, thank you. So the question I had was actually different than the one that your counsel asked that was outside of your witness statements. I'm not asking about an instance in which you saw saltwater permits revoked, which was not in your report and what he asked you earlier. What I'm asking you is, are you aware in your years of experience in which there was an existing designated oil production unit and a commercial saltwater disposal operator permitted new operations within the boundaries of the unit? Yes or no?
Well, I have to ask a clarifying question. You're saying unit, you're talking about a drilling unit, a secondary recovery unit? What are we talking about?
Secondary recovery unit.
I can't think of any instance where I've seen that.
And you had how many decades of experience before you sat in the chair today?
Guess it's getting close to 4.
So with 4 decades of experience, if this commission wants to know, can you tell them about an instance in which a regulatory body, be it in Texas or New Mexico or Wyoming or North Dakota or Louisiana or any other place on the face of the planet, a commission authorized a commercial saltwater disposal operator to inject into a secondary recovery unit that had been established? You can't recall one, can you?
Other than this one?
Yes.
I can't, but I wouldn't do it from memory. If someone asked me to do that, I'd go research it.
I'm going to publish a couple slides here, just as we talked about the concept of paying quantities. And you know, your report, your deposition, you speak of economically recoverable, technically recoverable. I mean, you've introduced the concept of economics into everything that you're doing here, haven't you?
Much of it.
And in fact, if the commission wants to know, you are the only witness in this case for Goodnight that will be testifying on economics. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if that's true or not.
Stated differently, as you've reviewed all of these witness statements, you didn't see anybody else besides yourself that would help this commission with economic testimony as concerns Goodnight. True?
I don't know if that's true. There's been some new reports put forward that were sir rebuttal, and I'd have to look at those to tell you for sure.
All right, let's take this in pieces. Earlier, you said production and paying quantities, at least in the state of Texas, but you weren't sure on state of New Mexico. And here is a Supreme Court of New Mexico case discussing paying quantities, generated income against operating costs, and it actually cites the seminal Texas Supreme Court case of Clifton versus Kuntz, which you're familiar with.
Yes.
Looks identical to as you understand it in Texas, yes?
Which looks identical.
The paying
highlighting?
quantities analysis in New Mexico.
It's identical, and it's also referring to keeping a lease in place.
Next one. With respect to the New Mexico Constitution, do you see that in terms of what this commission is doing here is the protection of the state's beautiful and healthful environment? It's of fundamental importance to the public interest, to health, safety, and general welfare, that the legislature shall provide for control of despoilment of natural resources of the state, consistent with the use and development of these resources for the maximum benefit of the people. I read that generally correctly on the part we care about here.
You did.
Would be consistent with how you understand Texas is charged.
I suspect.
Objection, Mr. Hearing Officer, he's asking for a conclusion, a legal conclusion about comparing New Mexico law constitution with Texas law. Mr. Macbeth is not a lawyer.
Not sure it's a legal conclusion. It's just asking to compare the language overruled.
I can answer. I suspect there's some similar provision in the Texas Constitution.
I hope we could all agree that in listening to all of the testimony in the case, this commission should be vitally concerned with protecting this state's natural resources for the maximum benefit of its people, especially here where 60% of those resources are in fact owned by the people. You agree?
I don't think we have to tell the commissioners that.
We can have the next slide. The commission's empowered to prevent waste. Go to the next slide. We've talked about waste. And what's your understanding of what prevention of waste is?
It would be impacting economically recoverable reserves, be they gas or oil.
Or just tending to reduce the total quantity of crude petroleum oil recovered, yes?
I think there's an implicit economics in there because it's not reasonable to assume this would apply to uneconomic reserves.
Let's talk about uneconomic. Even if you're not impressed by my client Empire and the work that they've spent millions of dollars to bring here to this commission, there are reserves that hypothetically could not be economically recoverable at this precise moment that the state of New Mexico owns, but that through advances in technology, the changes in cost profile, or the changes in commodity price environment become economically in the future.
You can't call them reserves.
Okay. What would you like me to call the state of New Mexico's oil and gas hydrocarbon molecules that are literally inside the EMSU San Andreas right now?
You can call it an alleged resource.
Okay. So the alleged resource, so as we talk about the state of New Mexico's people's alleged resource, as it sits in the San Andreas and even in the Grayburg right now, we can agree that changes in technology, changes in cost profile, or changes, and this is an or, not an and, or changes in commodity price can all make the, help me with your phrase again, the
Alleged resource.
alleged resource now become economically recoverable.
I mean, that's possible.
Okay. The Oil Conservation Division may make rules and orders for the purposes and with respect to the subject matter stated in this subsection. Number 4, to prevent the drowning by water of any stratum or part thereof capable of producing oil or gas or both oil and gas in paying quantities. You can tell the commission that if they're applying subsection B4 here, you do not have a paying quantities analysis prepared in this case. Isn't that true?
The term paying quantities to me is a term of art that applies to producing wells and whether or not they hold leases. So I'm really confused about you trying to insert that term of art into a discussion of undeveloped and unproven contingent resources.
The question is narrow, Mr. Macbeth. If the commission wants to know whether you have any production and paying quantities analysis for them, your answer is I do not have one. Isn't that true?
If you tell me that paying quantities in this particular case means you would go into the spreadsheet and delete capital expenses and rerun the spreadsheet, I don't have it.
And if you did do that, you know perfectly well that this is all a positive case, don't you?
I also know perfectly well that that would be meaningless for making a decision to implement an ROZ project.
Likewise, the commission has the duty to avoid water encroachment that reduces or tends to reduce the total ultimate recovery of crude petroleum, oil, or gas, or both. Is that your understanding?
Well, that's what it says here.
We can take that down. I want to come back to just speak high level as we just talk about how important the proceeding. Mr. Rankin actually talked about how important the proceeding is, and I absolutely agree. We know that 60% of these hydrocarbons, the quote unquote alleged resource of the people, is here in the EMSU. And you've heard from Mr. West's mouth how committed the CEO of Empire is to ensuring development of those resources.
I heard him testify about that.
Do you think he's being disingenuous, or you think he's a kidder, he's a joker, or do you think that's earnest?
I take him at face value.
Wouldn't the people of New Mexico benefit greatly if Empire at least gets its chance to spend its money at zero economic risk to the people of the state of New Mexico to develop this precious natural resource?
Wouldn't, I missed the first part of that.
Wouldn't the people of New Mexico be benefited greatly if Empire is at least permitted to expend the many millions of dollars it would take to develop this resource?
It depends on the success of the project, whether they would benefit greatly.
And you've heard Mr. West say that until the saltwater injection is stopped, they can't even get to a place to raise money or put the plans together to develop the project, because the very first thing any investor or stockholder is going to want to know is, why on earth are you doing this where there's 9 commercial saltwater injection wells in the quote unquote alleged resource zone?
That's not what he said. He said his major shareholder would pay for it.
Can you agree that as a matter of common sense, the first step towards developing the ROZ here in the San Andreas would in fact be stopping the saltwater injection?
Not in the disposal zone.
You've heard Empire say that they intend to conduct an ROZ project on all of the San Andreas. You've heard that through multiple witnesses, haven't you?
They said they intend to do 400 net feet over 1,500 feet.
And I know you want to make a distinction between upper San Andreas and lower San Andreas, and you call the lower San Andreas the disposal zone.
Effectively, yeah, that broadly describes it.
You can tell the commission that if Empire is developing 400 either gross feet or net feet, that's obviously going to be into what you're calling the disposal zone, isn't it?
If it was 1,500 feet, it would be, yes.
No, I said 400 feet. If the interval of development is 400 feet, even if it's just 400 feet.
Whose top are we using?
Either top.
I think that would probably cover the zone, most of the zone, yes.
And so you've seen that the net pay that some of the Empire model is built off of has at places 400 feet of net pay. Some places 300 feet, different net pay zones.
Which model are you talking about?
Mr. West's model.
I did not hear him testify about which model he linked that to. He said 400 feet in his deposition. He said it's the top 400 feet. And there was no specificity given about which expert that would have linked up to. Some of those analyses didn't even exist when he was deposed.
And again, I'm just trying to not play the injection zone terminology game with you. If it's 400 feet from anybody's top of San Andreas, you can tell the commission that we are into what you are calling the injection zone, aren't we?
Approximately, that's true.
And so you said you didn't doubt Mr. West was earnest when he told this commission under oath about Empire's intention to conduct an ROZ project in the San Andreas. You've heard him say this is 400 feet or more, that he said 1,500 feet, right?
He did, yes.
And so I come back to my first question, which was, wouldn't the people of the state of New Mexico benefit from this? Because they have a cost-free, risk-free opportunity to receive a royalty off of the $1 million of development that's going to be spent by Empire.
Well, you keep saying benefit greatly. They will only benefit greatly if it's a successful project.
But until the saltwater disposal is stopped, it would make no sense for Empire to even start that project, would it?
I think they can coexist. You're going to hear from other witnesses. I'm the first witness in our case, and you're going to see log analysis that shows there's not saturations in that interval that are worth even trying. So, you know.
Okay, work with me in this hypothetical. We can all agree there are some under anybody's analysis, Mr. Davidson's, Empire's, there are hydrocarbons in the San Andreas all the way to the base of the Glorieta.
I don't know that all the way. You talking about continuously?
Throughout the 1,500 feet. They may not be at oil in place volumes that are good enough for you or Mr. Davidson, but there are volumes there under anybody's analysis, aren't there?
There are sporadic instances of saturations down to the base.
And you just heard Empire testify that at zero expense to the people of the state of New Mexico, they want to try to get the hydrocarbons out of all 1,500 feet.
I mean, that's what Mr. West said.
You would agree with me that it makes no sense to start that project in the 1,500 feet while a saltwater disposal commercial operator is injecting into that unitized oil interval.
It depends. It depends on the pressure. It depends on the volume. It depends on what part of the field you're talking about. I think they could start it, even if I accept your premise that they want to do it through the entire interval, which I think is, based on what I've seen, would not be a good idea. There are parts of the field where they could start that and prove it up.
Let's take the other side of the coin. If the commission decides to allow saltwater disposal into the pore space owned by the people of New Mexico, allow it to continue, and let's even permit some more saltwater disposal into that pore space. You with me so far on the hypothetical?
No.
They don't revoke any of the permits, and they even approve the new
Can I
ones.
tell you what's hanging me up? You went back to the pore space of the people of New Mexico. I don't know what leases, where the volumes are going at this time, so I don't know.
Before coming and giving this commission testimony about what they should make by way of decisions here, you didn't bother to do that research.
That's not part of the analysis that goes into a saltwater disposal application.
Well, let's take the other side of the coin. If they don't revoke the permits, they don't stop the saltwater injection, and they also allow even more saltwater injection. You with me so far in the hypothetical?
I am.
Goodnight is a Dallas-based company. Is that right?
I think that's true.
They're private equity funded by a company in Fort Worth, Texas.
No idea.
All of the revenue from the saltwater disposal would go in a little tiny quantity to one fee surface owner at the little 5-6 acre pad site. And the rest of the money would all go across state lines over to North Texas to be spent in Dallas and Fort Worth, Texas.
I don't know. No idea.
Can you help me with how allowing this saltwater, well, let me strike that. Have you seen any analysis in this case that by any witness or Goodnight, that if this saltwater disposal is stopped, you with me so far?
Yes.
That any particular oil and gas well in New Mexico would have to be shut in for lack of saltwater disposal capacity, yes or no?
Well, We've only just started our case, so I haven't seen that yet, but no.
So you haven't, you've had access to all of the witness statements that Goodnight's prepared, right?
Yes,
You've probably gone to dinner with the other Goodnight witnesses and you sit over a hamburger, or a flat enchilada, or whatever you want to eat. And y'all have had a chance to talk about the case over these meals, spending
a good amount of time to do that.
Okay. You haven't heard over the flat enchilada dinners or in any of the witness statements that you've seen so far, anybody say they've conducted an analysis and that if this commission rules in favor of Empire, a particular oil producing well will be shut in for lack of saltwater capacity. True?
I've certainly heard discussions about the effect it would have on future development of wells because disposal capacity is critical for drilling future horizontal wells.
You have not seen any such study conducted or provided in any of the witness statements.
You asked me about going to dinner and listening to.
Yeah, I changed the
That's what I'm
question.
answering.
Yeah, I changed the question. You haven't seen any of this in any of the witness statements for the commission.
I have not.
You guys have, just try and, for the court reporter's sake, try and make sure you don't talk over each other.
That's my fault. I apologize.
That's all right.
It's my
happens.
fault.
No.
Mr. Macbeth and I are actually dear friends.
couldn't tell.
We really are. This is, he's one of my favorite people on the earth.
I'd hate to see your enemies.
So, Mr. Macbeth, as we come back to this hypothetical, you're not prepared to explain any case of economic harm to the state of New Mexico or its citizens if this saltwater disposal is stopped, are you?
I have not undertaken that study.
And you haven't seen any Goodnight witness undertake that particular study, have you?
Not so far.
Now, earlier you said engineers want data. As part of doing your work here, it was important to you to hear the testimony, yes?
Yes.
Now, and I'm taking your slides kind of in reverse order just because this one came to mind as we're visiting. With respect to the tall cotton field, that you actually thought that was important enough to provide a slide on it?
Yes.
And the reason you provided a slide on it and offered testimony was because you wanted to offer that to this commission as a failure case, right?
No, actually, the main reason was to try to answer Dr. Palma's question about ROZ recovery factors, which has come up in a number of witnesses. It's hard information to find. And I realized looking at the exhibits when Mr. Meltzer was testifying that, oh, we could actually determine this.
Did you hear Mr. Meltzer's testimony about what happened at Tall Cotton?
I heard something about it. I don't recall.
That he was actually a consultant to Kinder Morgan and that he told them, don't do it. And they did it and they fracked into the injector wells and ruined their injector wells.
I did hear that. Yes.
Okay. Wouldn't that be important testimony for this? If you're going to use that as you called it, you were measuring the success factor. What did you call it?
Recovery factor.
The recovery factor. As an engineer, wouldn't it be important to provide the commission with the information as you talk about recovery factor that the darn injector wells got fracked into and ruined?
The commission already knew that from Mr. Meltzer's testimony.
Could that be an explanation as to why the recovery factor was less than perhaps was anticipated on the front end?
If you look at that decline curve, I would expect to see a dramatic change somewhere. It depends when that happened in the life, what portions of the lease, if it really affects the entire lease. So the specifics matter.
Let's move into your slides. And I'm just going to take them in the order that you put them together.
Okay.
The first one was the new tech. You had the oil saturations that you were talking on.
I can't see it just yet.
Mr. Macbeth knows me well enough to know I'm the least technology savvy person in this entire room. And Miss Hardy has been so kind to help over here. pull it. Slide 2 is fine. All right. So what I've done is just taken your slide 2 and added New Tech's revised calculations. Were you in here when New Tech testified on those this week?
I was not here, but I was listening.
Okay. And you knew that when you prepared this slide, that this was on the first case that New Tech had provided, right?
Absolutely. And I explained why I included that.
But just in terms of making sure this commission has the information it needs to go back and make a decision, if we look over on the left-hand column to New Tech's revised oil saturations at 54%, 41%, 37%, 10%, 26%, 15%, and 6%. You can tell the commission that those are accurate in terms of the revised New Tech numbers.
I'll have to take your word for it because I haven't summed those up over those intervals.
But in terms of presenting the commission with a slide, you chose the old New Tech numbers, not the new numbers.
I used the old ones because at their deposition, they said those are the ones they were going to stand behind.
And as you sit here, you're not ready to dispute any of these numbers that just for the commission's ease and reference I've provided here.
I would hope whoever put this together summed up the right numbers.
Likewise, your slide number 3 used the outdated New Tech. Uh-oh, we're frozen again. There we go. All right. So all I've done here is made the point to the commission that what you used was old New Tech, and that if we used the new Tech, it's not 62% oil, it's 32% oil. Yeah.
Don't know. I mean, this was kind of an involved calculation I had to do to put everything on a bulk volume basis. But assuming someone did that correct over the right interval, those numbers probably would change with their new revised information.
Stated differently, you're not ready to dispute here 32% oil would be the revised average of New Tech.
Of the new numbers,
Yes.
I'm not ready to dispute it because I haven't done that work, but I'll hang my hat on them saying they thought the original ones were the ones they would stand behind.
And in fact, the volumes that were used by Mr. West and his economic model would be conservative to 32% saturation, wouldn't they?
You're asking me if 30 is less than 32?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, great. But New Tech, that would not be direct. Would New Tech's analyses, would that, as I come back to this direct evidence distinction that you've drawn from this witness stand today, are New Tech's figures direct evidence or those are not direct evidence?
Indirect. So
Okay.
logs are inference. When you make calculations on logs, those are inferences.
So in terms of making a direct evidence case to the commission, logs aren't good enough because you think we need direct evidence.
But you're mixing up, we were talking about the effect of disposal on Empire's operations when I was talking about direct evidence, like wells pressuring up, drastic changes in production profile, total volumes in the field changing. That's what we were talking about when that came up.
Okay, let's go to the, actually, let me ask, have you ever analyzed the new Tech numbers?
Have I looked at the numbers? I've looked at the report. I have not gone into there. I have to see if we even got them, the LAS files, to sum up the half a foot by half a foot numbers.
And I guess that's my point for the commission. There's a difference between looking at something and analyze something. I can look at all sorts of stuff. That doesn't mean I've analyzed it. On the revised New Tech, have you analyzed those or gone no farther than looking at them?
I've only looked at them and I told the commission why.
But you would agree that the most important thing we do here for the state of New Mexico and its people is get this right, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Have you ever analyzed ops geologics saturations?
If I'm going to use the term like you used it in the last question, analyzed, which means take their files, sum them up, make averages, no.
Okay, so you're the only person that you're aware of that we're going to hear from in this case for Goodnight on economic things. We know that New Tech revised their numbers but you didn't analyze those. And we know that you had geology and geophysical work from Ops Geologic, but you haven't analyzed that either.
Well,
True?
the geology, did we see geophysical work in this case? I don't think so.
I meant to say petrophysical. If I said
Okay.
geophysical, I misspoke.
Okay. So I think there was a ruling after our last hearing that certain witnesses would be allowed to serve surrebuttal reports. And that work was done by Mr. Knights and Dr. Davidson, because they've done the specific look at those analyses.
And I'm only asking you because you're the one in the box and you're the only economics guy having the whole case. So this, if I have economic stuff, you're my only guy I get to talk to.
Okay.
You have not done any analysis of any of the ops geologic work, be that from Mr. Burkhead or Mr. Bailey. True?
And I have not.
Now, if this commission wants to know who on the planet Earth knows the most about the EMSU and the Grayburg and the San Andreas, will you work with me and let's make a list for the commissioners on who on the planet knows the most about it?
I'm not sure.
Could we agree Chevron?
Oh, you're talking about in history?
Yeah, we're just going to work on that. Let's just go through the entire history of time. If these commissioners want to know who on the planet knows the most about it, we would agree Chevron would be on that list. Yeah.
Some people at Chevron, yes.
We would agree that Exxon's on that list.
When they were the operator, I expect there were some people at Chevron that knew stuff.
And we would agree that Empire would be on that list.
They should.
And in terms of Goodnight, to your knowledge, they have never once been an oil and gas producer, have they?
I don't know that to be true.
Likewise, over the flat enchilada dinners with Mr. McGuire, you know that save one short internship, he's never worked for a producer, has he?
I don't know.
Okay. And could we add Dr. Lindsay, who did his entire PhD thesis dissertation? Could we add him to the list of people that know the most about this place on the planet?
About the Grayburg, I'd say.
And he's certainly done plenty of work on the San Andreas too, hasn't he?
Most of what I heard in his testimony related to the Grayburg.
If the commissioners would like to know what geologist on the planet knows more about the San Andreas at this location, who would that be?
I don't know.
Is Dr. Lindsay be the best you can come up with?
You
Agree?
said San Andreas this time?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm just saying, if there's somebody other than Dr. Lindsay, I'm just happy to hear about it if you know who it'd be.
This is not something I do go around trying to rank people and what they know about a certain field.
Now, Exxon, that was one of the ones that you said would know a lot about the area. You can tell the commissioners Exxon would have the operational data, best operational data in this area, right?
You're talking about production and well information?
Anything a producer would care about.
I would hope they had received everything from the previous operator.
There's no oil and gas company on the planet Earth better economically situated than Exxon to have the resources to study the area. Agree?
Have the resources to do what?
Study the area.
Oh, that's probably true.
In terms of public data, Exxon would have access to all the public data. You agree?
Yes.
And in terms of proprietary derived data internally from their scientists and engineers, Exxon is better equipped than any other oil company on the planet by way of their internal human resources to know everything they could know about this area. Agree?
It depends how they allocated people and resources. I mean, if they were focusing on it, sure.
And by way of access to contractors, certainly Exxon has plenty of access and recourse to contractors.
That's true.
All right. And they're publicly traded. And so, you know, they're subject to all of the securities laws, federal and state.
You're talking to an engineer, but I have a general understanding of that. Yes.
And again, Exxon's a client of yours.
True.
Has it been your experience that XTO or Exxon goes around lying to folks?
Absolutely not.
All right, let's take a look at you saw this was part of the advertising material from Exxon as the efforts when Empire purchased the EMSU, right?
I saw this slide. Yes.
And do you see that they've picked the top of the San Andreas? in the type log on the left.
I do see the word San Andres, yes.
And then below it, there's a ROZ identified, a top and a bottom.
Yes,
And over in the left, it says residual oil zone 300 feet thick. You agree?
it does say that, yes.
And it's got 912 million barrels of original oil in place. You see that?
Yes.
Do you think Exxon was joking about this when they put it on here? Or are they kidders?
No, but if you look at other slides, the word potential is scattered through here.
You can tell the commissioners that this analysis much more closely aligns in terms of assessment of oil in place with the Empire case than it does with the work by Dr. Davidson. Isn't that true?
I haven't looked at this closely enough to say that. Because I don't know what you mean by
At
analysis.
912 million barrels of oil in place in the San Andres ROZ, you don't think that looks a whole lot more like the Empire analysis of its experts than Dr. Davidson's extremely pessimistic case?
I haven't seen anybody in this case who's added up the amounts that are calculated on a section basis to include MSUB, EMSU, or AGU. And that's the number I would need to answer your question.
Now, in terms of scientists or engineers, they always want more data, don't they? More data is better.
Yes,
At your deposition, you explained that this is an ongoing fluid process, that you get data, you do your work, you get more data, you do more work. As we've seen through Dr. Lindsay's life work, he's still doing work right here on the EMSU, isn't he?
is he? I didn't know that. Yeah.
He did a fracture study last week on the R bell, but I don't think we're going to bring it in. I think
I haven't seen it.
it's a little tardy. Yeah, but we agree it's tardy, but we've got it. If Mr. Rankin wants it, we'll give it over to him. How about that? But as we talk about data, all right. I mean, core data would be really valuable here, wouldn't it be?
Additional core data would be, I mean, you say valuable from what standpoint?
To calculate original oil in place in the EMSU?
To know if it's there? Yes.
Absolutely, because at that point, could we agree that we're now out of logs and would we be into what you call direct data at that point?
Core would be, yes.
Direct evidence.
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of anybody that's drilled deep into the San Andres in the last 5 years, who would have been operationally, technically in a position to get that core data so that we could come here and have an absolute done and finished conversation. Based on your review of all the drilling permits that have happened in the EMSU, who is the only party on the planet that could have done that?
Could have done a core
Yep.
in the last 5 years. You make me say it? Goodnight.
Oh, Goodnight could have. So in terms of bringing this commission for these important decisions over the minerals of the people of New Mexico, actual direct evidence, Goodnight has actually drilled deep into the San Andres, and they could have taken pressure core if they wanted to spend the money.
That would be unusual for a saltwater disposal company who's focused on completing a well, getting in shape to deliver volume subsurface, to take cores through the zone.
But you've already told the commission that based on 4 decades of your experience, this is a highly unusual situation because you've never seen a commercial SWD operator injecting into a designated secondary oil recovery unit.
What I said was, if you want to know the answer to that, I'll go research it.
Yeah.
I don't know sitting here.
Okay, but let's just come back and make sure the commission has a concrete answer to this. The one party that could have taken pressure core deep into the San Andres as part of work they were going to do anyway, that would be Goodnight, right?
I'm recognizing that the well, under the time period that you have given me and put me in this box, the only well that was drilled in the area that deep was Goodnight. I'm saying also it would be unusual for a disposal company to do that.
If they didn't want to spend the money on pressure core, they could have also done sponge core, but they didn't do that either.
They didn't say course.
If they didn't want to spend the money for pressure core or sponge core, they could have could have taken oriented core, couldn't they?
Being conventional core.
Oriented where you, doesn't oriented where you're going north, you know exactly north, south, or,
You could do that, but
okay.
seems like you're alleging that that's walking down some expense.
Is oriented core not more expensive than just plain conventional core that's not oriented?
So you're going to regular next?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So they could have taken, they could have taken oriented core too, couldn't they?
You mean like in a vacuum, hypothetically, anybody that drills a well can take cores if they want to?
And if they didn't want to spend that money, they could have gone with the cheapest of the four options and just done conventional core.
If you're drilling a well, you can take a core.
Do you know how excited Dr. Lindsay would have been in here if he would have had even he doesn't even need it oriented, just conventional core down to the bottom. And I think our commissioners would have been pretty excited too.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But again, Goodnight didn't spend the money to do this.
As far as I know, they did not core the wells.
And it's easy to tear something down. It's harder to build something up. Isn't it a fair assessment if you read all of these reports that Goodnight has pulled together? All they're doing is picking and fussing and tearing and ripping, saying there's not enough data for Empire to stop the destruction of of the minerals in its ROZ.
I don't think that's a fair assessment.
All right, let's talk on pressures. I think as we move on to pressures, I want to get to your correct slide. Your slide 4 doesn't have relevance anymore because that one was on the, and I'm not showing the right thing right now, but your slide 4 was the one, uncertain original pressure data. Now that Mr. West, you've heard him say, we agree it's 250 subsea, not 250 above subsea. That's not anything the commissioners need to worry about.
What's 4?
4 was the uncertain original pressure data. I'm just trying to avoid Miss Hardy having to.
Well, the only thing that's still relevant there is the uncertainty that goes around with the actual measurement. The only place we see it is on a single entry in the unitization technical report. We don't have a fluid level. We don't have a direct measurement, bottom hole pressure. I mentioned that in my direct testimony.
Let's take that in pieces. Are you suggesting with whenever the original bottom hole pressure was taken, that there was a problem with the tool? You're not suggesting there was a mechanical problem, are you?
I just don't know what the basis of that pressure is. Did someone estimate it? Did they take it from a fluid level? Did they actually measure it? So all we know is somebody wrote down 1450.
Okay, so just coming back to Empire working with the data that we have, what would you use for original pressure if you don't use the one from the technical committee report?
In the Grayberg, I think I would use that. My problem is extrapolating it down to the St. Andrews where there hasn't been a measurement back to original, which is one half of the comparison that Mr. West makes.
You're saying that the measurement was not taken in the St. Andrews?
The 1450?
The 250 subsea?
Yeah, that's not in the St. Andrews.
Under
That's in the
whose,
Grayberg.
under whose tops?
Anybody's.
Okay.
Yeah.
With respect to an original pressure reading, what would you use then for the St. Andrews?
I would keep looking. I haven't found one.
You would agree that Empire used the best data available?
Don't know. I mean, that's the one piece of information I've seen that they have.
You said your slide 5, uncertain original pressure data, that's not relevant anymore, right?
You have to show me. Is that the one with the cartoon?
The cartoon, yep.
Other than to remind you where the Grayberg is.
Mr. Macbeth and I have both been yelled at by an expert for calling something a cartoon, so I'm careful on calling things cartoons. All right. If we go to your slide 7, can we put that one up? I just want to make sure see. Actually, slide 6 real quick. Where do you get the top of your San Andreas?
Where do I get the top?
Yeah, so just if the commission wants to know where the top of the San Andreas is, what is your are you just wholly relying on Mr. McGuire for that?
For the most part, I am, but in this particular analysis, in my original statement, I referenced 3 kind of equidistant wells around the 211. They were all water supply wells that the operator drilled and reported San Andreas tops. And I compared that to the top that he says the San Andreas is in the 211 and noted that it was anomalous.
Okay, I want to do just a little bit of geology at the start. May I have the New Mexico paper, please? From the Bureau of Mines and Mineral Resources. All right. You see this paper that was published by the New Mexico Bureau of Mines and Mineral Resources, a division of the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology.
Yes.
Did you look at this paper as part of any of your work?
Can you scroll through it a little bit?
Yeah, we'll go down page 12. Let's just stop there. Yeah. The San Andreas Formation, Leonardian and Guadalupian, is about 1,500 feet thick in this area. The upper part is dolomite with an interval of sandstone and black shale, known as the Lovington Sand, about 150 feet below the top.
Just so I'm clear, is this an exhibit that was previously admitted into the record? Can you just tell me the exhibit number?
For record reference, Exhibit K60.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we have here is that you would find the top of the San Andreas, and then you would go down about 150 feet and you would find the Lovington Sand. Fair summary of what we're seeing here?
That's what this highlighted information shows.
Speaks to dolomites and the Lovington Sand actually inside the San Andreas, right?
I'd like to see the whole sentence.
Sure.
I mean, I see the words that you've highlighted. Yes.
Okay. So have you looked at Ryan Bailey's geological work in terms of picking tops off of the various logs?
I've listened to his testimony.
And so he would identify a top of San Andreas, and then approximately 100 feet below that, he can identify a clear Lovington Sand in there.
Maybe that's, I'm not sure if that's a good generalization.
Have you looked at any of Mr. McGuire's work to see whether you could figure out where the Lovington Sand is in relation to the top of the San Andreas?
No, I have not.
It wouldn't make any sense as a matter of geology if in some places the Lovington Sand is above the San Andreas or at it, and in other places below it, would it?
Mr. Examiner, I object. Mr. Macbeth is not a geologist, and Mr. Waymeyer is asking him as a matter of geology, and it's not something that Mr. Macbeth is qualified to testify on.
Overruled. You certainly have enough familiarity with the geology out here to know that the Lovington Sand is not going to move above the top of the San Andreas in some places and below the top of the San Andreas in other places. That doesn't make any sense, does it?
The only thing I've done with tops independently is to look at those 3 wells surrounding the 211 and note what the original operators who drilled those wells put as the top.
In terms of literature that would say that the Lovington Sand is an impermeable barrier, can you tell the commission, after all of your work, whether you found any literature that would say the top of the San Andreas, strike that. Can you tell the commission about any literature that would say the Lovington Sand is an impermeable barrier?
That has not been part of my study.
Can you tell the commission about if we move 150 feet up from the Lovington Sand? You with me so far?
Yes.
Can you tell the commission about any literature that says the top of the San Andreas is an impermeable barrier?
I have not done that in this study, so I don't know.
Now, as we talk about your pressures, isn't the real point of the pressure discussion, there's several slides on it, but that's to the point of you trying to make the case that there's no communication between the top of the San Andreas and the Grayburg, right?
It's to really explain the pressures in that RFT, that not only between the two measurements between the San Andreas, as Empire defines it, and the first lowest measurement in the Grayburg, but also those other stations as the tool was brought to surface.
Right, but isn't that to the ends of trying to say that there's no communication between Grayburg and San Andreas?
That's one thing I note, that it really comments on the validity of the conclusion that Mr. West made.
We have seen literature from the technical committee report and Chevron and Dr. Lindsay that discusses there being places where water infiltrates up from the San Andreas into the Grayburg, haven't we?
You'll have to show me.
You just don't recall?
I recall some discussions that were caveated about that. Nuanced discussions, not as simple as the way you've just described it. So you'll have to show me what you're talking about.
Some of them actually been shown with Mr. West today, haven't they? You've seen them on the screen?
We're talking about studies like the technical report, things like that.
The Chevron technical report and also Dr. Lindsay's thesis.
I mean, I saw the snippets from that today. Yes.
Yeah, and just with under the plain ordinary English language could be interpreted by a reader as coming to a conclusion that water was infiltrating up from the San Andreas into the Grayburg. Fair?
It depends which San Andreas we're talking about.
Has Dr. Lindsay ever been confused about where the top of the San Andreas is?
I don't know.
Can you direct the commissioners to any literature, witness statements, or writings by Dr. Lindsay where he was ever confused about the Lovington Sand being approximately 150 feet below the top of the San Andreas?
Of course not.
And again, if the commissioners wanted to know who the geologist is that would know more about this place on the planet, you couldn't get us a human there, could you?
Nope.
What would be your assumption that the Grayburg has a uniform thickness?
Well, you're talking about my assessment of Mr. West's top in the 211?
I'm off of your slide 6. I mean, it appears to me that you just treat the Grayburg as having a uniform thickness of approximately 400 feet.
What makes you say that from this slide?
Maybe I'm on the wrong one. Well, with respect to your contention about where the bottom hole pressure was taken, don't you rely on a uniform Grayburg thickness to place that bottom hole reading?
So
Objection foundation. Mr. Waymire is asking about bottom hole pressures. There were no bottom hole pressures.
Mr. Waymire, a little more foundation if you have it.
Earlier, you testified that the original San Andreas pressure that Empire has was actually taken out of the Grayburg. Isn't that your test?
the 1450?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that on the assumption that the Grayburg is approximately 400 feet thick?
No.
How did you get to that place?
By looking at the cross sections from the unitization hearing, I picked an example, but there's about, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them in there, all that put the Grayburg at about minus 250 MSL.
Have you conducted a analysis of the thickness of the Grayburg across the EMSU?
Across the total?
Yes.
No.
Do you believe it's uniformly thick at approximately 400 feet thick?
I haven't studied it. I don't know.
We hit your slide 7. As the commission goes back to make important decisions, again, this slide, the pressure depletion, this was off of Mr. West's old analysis. This is not the one that would be consistent with a 250-foot subsea interpretation. Isn't that right?
Actually, the oldest one he did is right. This was the second one he did that he then abandoned and went back to the original one or oldest one.
Thank you for correcting me. I'm exactly opposite on it, and you're exactly right. The one that he's testified to here in this court is different than this, correct? In the
Well-
commission hearing?
No, actually, I think he had the wrong one up and he said this should be corrected. I don't think the substitution was made.
Okay.
Remember, it appeared that the decision to move the datum must have happened really late in the game because there were a bunch of slides that didn't get updated.
Okay, well, just so that I just do not want this commission confused. The pressure depletion percent down in the bottom right-hand corner of 28.7%, you with me there?
Yes.
You know, based on Mr. West's testimony in this commission proceeding, that number's about 18, 19%.
I understand that.
Okay. We can go to slide 8. Do you understand that it is Empire's position that there are baffles to fluid flow within the Grayberg?
It better be their position because
Yeah.
there are.
Yeah, and can baffles explain differences in pressure over short intervals?
It depends on the extent of the baffle. In order to support pressures of about, 262 PSI over 11 feet, the baffles would have to go long distances.
But certainly you would agree that there are baffles within the Grayberg and that those can lead to different pressure readings.
Well, I would agree that there are not continuous blocks of permeable intervals such as depicted in Dr. Buckwalter's model, and that this more closely resembles the geology that we see in Lindsay's model.
Okay, we can take that down for a minute. I want to talk about water compatibility or chemistry studies. Do you know whether Goodnight does any compositional analysis, chemistry analysis of the water that it's taken in from the Delaware Basin?
Objection, Mr. Hearing Officer. I'm not aware of any direct testimony that I elicited or that Mr. Macbeth has offered that has has touched on water chemistry in any way. It's outside the scope of cross.
I'll allow it.
Mr. Macbeth, you've told the commission that this is not going to cause any waste here, right? I mean, that was kind of the conclusion of the 1 hour and 40 minutes that you and Mr. Rankin spent together, wasn't it?
Based on my study, that's true. Yes.
Well, wouldn't you want to know by way of water chemistry and water compatibility, is this going to cause a problem when it's sucked up in a water supply well and used in the Grayberg?
We have many witnesses on our side of the case. I'm the first witness, and I've covered the areas that I feel are part of my expertise. And the commission is going to hear from those other witnesses on topics where their expertise applies.
Okay, but are you aware of any water chemistry? I'm just asking if you know about it. Any water chemistry analysis performed by Goodnight on the Delaware water?
The only thing I've seen is sitting here and seeing Mr. West's, I guess, summary of that. I presume that came from Goodnight.
Would you agree that if Delaware water is injected into the San Andreas and then it's sucked out of the San Andreas by Empire as part of its secondary water flood in the Grayberg, that water composition would be different than what's in the Grayberg?
Can you help me with the
Yep.
hypothetical? You said two things would happen.
Goodnight is taking water from Delaware Basin producers,
Okay.
right? You agree with that?
Yes, I do.
And they've complained that they get a lot of solids with it. Have you seen that in the documents?
Not really. No.
Okay. In terms of them having any clue what chemicals are in this water that they're getting out of the Delaware Basin, there are going to be frac chemicals, aren't there?
They will, on flowback, there would be chemicals, yes.
So there's going to be chemicals and it's going to be a different type of water that's in the San Andreas correct?
That's originally in the San Andreas?
Yes.
I haven't looked at that, but I suspect there could be some differences.
And then we know that Goodnight is, strike that, we know that Empire is sucking water out of the San Andreas as part of its water flood operations in the Grayburg.
You mean currently?
Well, it has been and may in the future.
I'm not sure.
Would you agree that if that water is used in the Grayburg, that it can have detrimental effects on Empire's oil wells?
Objection outside the scope of Mr. Macbeth's testimony. He's a reservoir engineer and petroleum engineer. He's not testified as to his qualifications on water chemistry. If Mr. Waymeyer wants to voir dire the witness to determine whether or not Mr. Macbeth has expertise to answer his questions, I think that's fine.
Will you be presenting a different witness?
We will.
Who will have expertise on this area that Mr. Waymeyer can save this question
We
for?
do.
Who is that?
Mr. Tomastic among several others.
Okay. Mr. Waymeyer, why don't you save that question? Sustain.
No problem. Thank you. In terms of pressures rising, you can agree historically, there's been a lot of water taken out of the San Andreas as part of water flood operations in the Grayburg. Isn't that true?
In the area of the MSU,
Yes.
there has been a lot of water out of the water supply wells.
Okay. And in terms of doing an analysis by way of comparison, in terms of what's been injected back, do you know, has more been sucked out or has all of that been replaced and now more injected back
Which area are we talking about?
in the EMSU?
I don't know.
You would agree that as that historical volumes of water injection into the EMSU,
Which zone?
San Andreas,
Okay.
historically water injected into the San Andreas, you've seen those historical volumes.
I've seen a lot of different summations of that, depending on how far out you go from the MSU.
You've seen it on at least monthly, month against year, going back to the 80s, haven't you?
We're talking about the orange and the blue chart.
Yes.
I've seen that.
Okay.
That's 1 mile around the MSU.
You can tell the commissioners that the volumes injected pre-Goodnight compared to what Goodnight has been doing and is proposing to doing are minuscule, aren't they?
Month to a month, they're smaller. If you add all that up, I don't know.
But in terms of the last 5 years, the amounts that were injected historically are minuscule compared to what Goodnight has done and plans to do. Isn't that true?
They're smaller. I don't know about minuscule, but they're smaller.
As you inject more water into the San Andreas, can we agree that that pressure is going to rise?
Depends on the size of the tank.
Have you seen Dr. Lake's opinion that pressure will rise 4 to 10 PSI per million barrels of water injected?
I've seen that, and that's based on individual well calculations, which I believe there's been additional testimony on that does it on more of a regional basis. It's a much smaller number.
From Dr. Lake?
I'd have to see which witness did that. It may have been Preston McGuire.
Okay, you don't have any knowledge of Dr. Lake updating any of that opinion or analysis, do you?
Dr. Lake did not submit a supplemental, so that's probably true.
To your knowledge, Dr. Lake's opinion is that for every 1 million barrels of water stuck into the San Andreas, pressure will rise about 4 to 10 PSI.
Well, I mean, I worked with him on that, so I know what it's based on. And I'm sure he's going to say that's an individual well analysis.
You've never worked for an oil and gas operator doing an ROZ in-house?
Not as an employee.
Have you ever assisted an operator with an economic analysis of an ROZ as an outside consultant?
Included with a main pay, yes.
Okay.
Because most of them the vast majority of them are commingled. There's hardly any of them that are individual.
Are you drawing a distinction between greenfield and brownfield with that?
No.
Okay. But just with respect to the San Andreas here in the EMSU that Empire is going to develop, that ROZ would not be what you would call a main pay, right?
Not main pay.
And you've never assisted a producer with an economic analysis of a non-main pay ROZ, have you?
Not where the ROZ was a standalone.
Will you help the commission though with, just explain to them the effect that rising pressures will have on the ability to carry out an ROZ development in the San Andres?
Depends on the magnitude of the pressures.
And the magnitude of the pressures are going to vary based on the magnitude of the saltwater injection, isn't it?
The main variable that we need to understand is the size of the reservoir.
Have you done that analysis?
Did you see my highlighted exhibit from Mr. Melzer?
Have you heard the geology from Dr. Lindsay that there's a trap on the east side where it pinches off and it doesn't leave?
In the San Andres? I don't think that's right.
Have you done any of the geology?
I have not.
So in terms of the idea that there's this unlimited ocean, is the basis for that statement just you pointing to one slide from Mr. Meltzer where he mapped a fairway?
The basis for that is the whole theory behind migration paths and the existence of ROZs in the Central Basin Platform.
So if the commission just wants a straight answer to what will be the effect of rising pressures through saltwater injection on the ability to carry out an ROZ, you're not competent to answer that question for the commission?
I didn't say that.
Okay, well,
I
go
said it
ahead.
depends on the amount of the pressure increase.
If pressure is increasing by 4 to 10% PSI per million of barrels injected, as Dr. Lake wrote, will you share with the commission what the hazards are to the ability to carry out an ROZ in the San Andres?
I can't because that's an invalid increase in pressure to use in this situation where the reservoir is so large.
Why do you think Empire cares so much about saltwater injection in its oil unit?
I can't put myself in their head. I don't know.
Let's talk about economics a little bit. Now, obviously, before carrying out a $1.2 billion ROZ development, there's going to be a lot more data gathering and there's going to be test projects on smaller scales, isn't there?
I would hope so.
So in terms of picking on Empire in either your deposition testimony or your written remarks about for a $1.2 billion CapEx outlay, we would see a whole lot more. That's not really fair because we all know that the first thing that would be started is this test cases on smaller scales. Fair?
Not picking on Empire. So I was hired to look at the information that they put in front of us. I was hired to help the lawyers make lists of things that we asked for. Hey, we expect you to have this information. We served discovery on them. Nothing came of it except a memo that was very vague. And then later on, this economic spreadsheet that they put forth to estimate waste. And I've been asked to comment on those and the validity of the inputs. And it's not personal. I'm not picking on Empire. I'm commenting on the analysis.
You would want oil miscibility studies, wouldn't you?
Did you say miscibility?
Oil miscibility study?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want slim tube testing. I want to make sure what pressure we're looking at. They've talked about 1,300 PSI. That seems low to me. You might want an increase in pressure in the San Andres to guarantee miscibility. And we really need to understand miscibility with respect to the quality of the oil if it's there, because ROZ oil has got different components. Most of the lights are swept away. So we do need to understand miscibility.
You would want some pressure or sponge cores?
I would, if I was in charge of the project, sure.
In terms of carrying out the test spacing and test wells, you'd probably want to pick your best structure for that, wouldn't you?
I don't know about that. That's more of a geologic input.
Do you know why? Have you compared where the saltwater disposal wells are in comparison to where the highest oil in place assessment is from both Ops Geologic and New Tech?
No, I haven't.
Has anybody with Goodnight shared with you how they're picking those saltwater disposal locations?
How they did in the past?
Yes.
No.
If Empire came to you and asked your opinion and said, we want to go raise money or get investors to develop this project, you would tell them that that's going to be a challenge in light of the saltwater disposal, the commercial saltwater disposal injection, wouldn't you?
I think the challenge would be that we've just got very little data in the San Andres with respect to the ROZ.
But certainly anybody looking at this is going to be very concerned about the saltwater disposal, commercial saltwater disposal injection.
If they wanted to do an ROZ in the disposal zone,
Which is, you understand that's everything that we're here on, right?
well, no.
I mean, I'm
The
not being a smart
disposal-
aleck, but,
There's the disposal zone and then there's the rest of the San Andres.
you just said, you heard Mr. West say, for the state of the people in New Mexico, he wants every bit of oil they can get out in 1,500 feet of gross pay. You understand?
I think that's a pipe dream. The way that the saturations are spread out across that 1,500 feet. There may be a part at the top of the San Andres, certainly in the Grayburg. But if somebody came to me and said, we want to flood the ROZ in the disposal zone, I'd say be very cautious with spending money.
I'm going to put on the record right here. You didn't tell them don't do it. All right. We'll move on to the next slide. We're at slide 11. With respect to your economic model, will you explain to the commissioners how you built your curve?
Which curve?
You did an economic analysis with a net present value 10 case, didn't you?
We might be on the wrong slide.
Well, but didn't you showed some slide with a net present value case where they were negative. You remember that?
Yeah, but that's not this slide.
Did that come out of your economic model?
Yes.
Well, tell them, how did you build your curve to forecast oil recoverability in your model?
I didn't build it. I explained this in my testimony. I took Empire's spreadsheet and I modified it.
So the true answer to my question, as we talk about, it's easy to rip things down and throw rocks as opposed to build something, is you didn't build a curve in this case, did you?
No, I didn't do an independent one.
With respect to the curve that's reflected here at slide 11, I know you like to highlight the Wyoming thing on there, but this was from Kinder Morgan, wasn't it? It was from a Kinder Morgan screening tool.
Don't know that. That's never been explained. Kinder Morgan came up today for the first time.
And in fact, Kinder Morgan built this tool off of its experience with developing ROZ and EOR in the Permian Basin. Isn't that right?
If that's true, I'm finding out about it right now because we asked specifically about the inputs to this model so that we could have time to look at it. And if you're just now telling me that this has a different source than this paper, this is the paper they gave us when we said, where did the curve come from?
So you're not prepared to explain to the commission that this was not off of the Kinder Morgan CO2 screening tool, which was built off of its Permian Basin experience in EOR and ROZ, are you?
If that was the answer to where the curve came from, I would have expected Empire would have told Goodnight it came from Kinder Morgan about 6 months ago.
Let's go to slide 13. Again, the dimensionless curve, you didn't, maybe I'm at the wrong, slide 12, that's another one of our curves. You didn't build your own curve, did you?
This one was in the model without any reference to where it came from.
Again, you didn't build your own curve.
Did not.
Oil prices, we're at slide 13. On oil prices, you understand that this ROZ would be a large capital expenditure with long years of actual development and production, right?
Yes.
You'd be very interested in what the out years of commodity prices are.
Well, nobody knows what they'll be. That's why we have to put ranges on the future prices.
And so that the commission has this in one place, you testified at your deposition, I think you would agree that in looking at an ROZ development, the single most important factor is commodity price. Isn't that true?
I'm not sure I said that. The single most important cost factor is CO2 price.
No, in terms of the economic viability of the whole project, the number one variable that makes the most difference is commodity price.
It's super important.
Okay, so we agree on that. Now, on the commodity price, here, with respect to Mr. West's model, it runs approximately 40 years out to end of economic life.
Which one? The 72 or the 250?
Yeah.
All right. For my entire 40-year plus career, I've always wanted to use the duck in a courtroom proceeding.
At least it wasn't a
That's your 5-minute warning.
At least it wasn't a donkey. Thank you. We'll wrap up here within the 5.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting you need to do that either.
I'll take the 5 and I'll close it down and we'll get everybody out of here on the Friday if that pleases the commission.
I'm not suggesting that you curtail your cross-examination if you have more areas to cover, just so it's clear.
We have a lot more to cover.
Okay.
But I tell you what, just in terms of using a flat deck, I mean, isn't the flat deck, these are publicly traded companies. This is the Securities and Exchange Commission trying to make apples to apples so that everybody can compare their PDP and their probables, and investors know exactly what are these economic cases based on.
That was a question?
Yeah.
The
use of a flat deck.
The use of a flat deck is one of the ranges of prices that we do in all economic analyses.
The EIA, do they have a long-term commodity price forecast that they publish?
Yes.
Would that commodity price forecast look a whole lot closer and actually even higher than the one that Empire used here at their conservative 1% escalator?
I haven't looked at it. The one.
So the EIA was a source of long-term commodity price data that you chose not to use in your model, right?
I used the futures market, and those are actual barrels that change hands.
Yeah, those are contracts that are happening in the year 2025.
Absolutely. And those are committed to deliveries. And it's very common for people to roll futures prices into their analysis.
Okay, but the EIA, you can't sit here and say whether it would actually even be a higher case than what Empire has projected.
I haven't looked at it because I don't use it, and I don't know any economic analysis folks that use the EIA deck.
Well, as we talk about direct evidence, wouldn't historical oil prices be direct evidence of prices?
No.
Why not?
Because they don't predict future prices.
Right. At least looking backwards, it would be, if the commission want to know over the last 36, 40 years, whatever, what has actually happened, that it would be a logical place to look, wouldn't it?
It would be an illogical place to look for a pro forma analysis that looks only into the future.
Have you looked over the last 40 years on what? It's going to be at the end. All right. If we just looking back to 1986, actual oil prices, do you see that there's been an average escalation of 2.77%? Oh, I lost it. Sorry. All right.
It's pulling up the wrong thing.
Yeah,
I saw the
you
chart.
saw it. It was 2.77% over the last 35, 40 years, right?
If somebody calculated that correctly, I mean, but historical prices have no relevance to analyzing future prices. They really don't.
What, in terms of the highest case ever at the conservative 1% escalator that Empire uses, what's the highest oil price that it ever gets to?
118.
You can tell the commissioners that we've seen $118 oil twice in the last 15 years, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of, it's not like this is an economic case that gets to some $175 WTI barrel that has never been seen in the history of time. We have seen $115 oil during our professional lives.
That's true.
And with respect to the 1% escalator that Mr. West used, just looking at historical, that would be conservative to historical, wouldn't it?
I would never look to historical to establish an escalator.
Commissioners, I'm at my time, and I know everybody's got other things to get to, but I certainly have additional examination. I would estimate an hour or less on the additional whenever we have to read them.
All right, we'll have to pick up,
Mr. Hearing Officer, before we sign off, I just want to remind everyone that I requested Jack Wheeler's notes that reflect what he provided to his paralegal, and I've emailed everyone about that, but I have not received a copy of those notes.
okay, well, take that.
Who was that speaking?
Sorry, Kendra, that's Matt Beck.
Thank you.
You'll, Mr. Beck, you'll just have to take that up with Empire. Mr. Rosatos, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we go off the record? Any housekeeping matters or other matters of substance?
We do, just like all of our commission meetings, we have to kind of wrap it up like we normally do. So thank you, everybody, for the participation this week. Appreciate it. Our next point that we have in our schedule and our agenda is any pending litigation. Mr. Chandler, do we have any pending litigation or any updates that we needed to bring up?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioners, any other business that we needed to bring up?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Not from me either.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Our last point is our next meeting is scheduled for April the 21st through the 25th of 2025, which is in 2 weeks. So we will see everybody again here in about 2 weeks. And if there's nothing else, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a happy and safe weekend, and we'll see you soon.